I'll call to order Senate Education. Thank you. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Buck, Senator Doñate, Senator Flores, Senator Hammond, Senator Neal, Senator Titus, Chair Lang,
Here.
Doñate.
Okay, thank you and welcome to the meeting today. Please silence your cell phones. It's after lunch and we've all been chatting. So just make sure there's silence. I know mine went off in a committee once and it's kind of embarrassing. Right, Senator Hammond?
Yes, yours did go off during committee and it was embarrassing.
Okay, so all our committee members are here, so I'm going to do a work session real quick, and then we'll go right into our bill hearing, and we'll hear our bills in order, 265 and then 285. So, our policy analyst, Jen Sturm Gaynor, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jen Sturm Gaynor, Committee Policy Analyst. First bill on work session today is Assembly Bill 54, which is sponsored by the Assembly Committee on Education on behalf of Nevada's Department of Education. We heard this bill on May 10th. The bill makes various provisions regarding school attendance and related topics. Among other items, the bill revises certain provisions concerning compulsory school attendance and student absences, requires school districts to monitor and report chronic absenteeism, and allows them to adopt chronic absenteeism policy, revises the circumstances under which a pupil may be declared habitually truant, requires the use of average daily enrollment for purposes of apportionment, requires the membership of an advisory board to review school attendance to reflect to the greatest extent possible the ethnic and geographic diversity of the relevant county, eliminates a reporting requirement regarding students who receive free or reduced price meals, authorizes hospitals and other facilities that provide certain educational services to a child to request reimbursement from the school district or charter school in which the child is enrolled, and revises the method for calculating such reimbursement, and authorizes certain notices and other communications to be made electronically. And we do have one amendment proposed for this bill, which is attached to the work session document from Nevada's Department of Education. The proposed amendment proposes to ensure that any time during the school day that a pupil receives external education therapies, that those therapies must be aligned with the pupil's individualized education plan or Section 504 plan. Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion of amend to pass on AB 54.
So moved.
It's been moved by Senator Flores. Do I have a second? Senator Hammond. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Senator Flores, will you take that to the floor?
Sure.
Okay, next one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jen Sturm Gaynor, Committee Policy Analyst. The next bill is Assembly Bill 175, which is sponsored by Assembly Members Urick and Bilbray Axelrod. We heard this bill on May 8th. The bill adds 4 appointed non-voting members to the Board of Trustees of a county school district with more than 75,000 pupils, which is currently Clark County School District. Finally, the bill specifies the appointment process and certain roles and responsibilities for those members. We did have a couple proposed amendments. Senator Hammond proposed an amendment to require that policies must be approved by at least 4 voting members of the board. And the bill sponsors proposed an amendment, which is attached to this bill page. The first removes the voting rights for the election of officers and the authority to serve as an officer of the Board of Trustees for the non-voting members of the Board of Trustees. 2, requires that the filling of a vacancy among the elected members of the board must be filled by appointment by the remaining elected members. And finally, it clarifies quorum requirements. Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to amend and do pass AB 175. It's been moved by Senator Hammond. Do I have a second? Second by Senator Donate. Any discussion? Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I appreciate the bill sponsors' changes. I will be voting no. I'm not voting no because of the rights and responsibilities piece. Is because I feel like there should be a guidelines around the criteria on who should be on the board. I also feel like there should be a sunset. This is a theory to test it out and see how it should work. So I'm voting no.
Thank you. Anyone else? Senator Buck.
Thank you, Chair Lang. I'll be supporting this measure today because I think governance and leadership matters, especially in regards to our children. And if, even though they're appointed and they don't have voting rights, if they have any influence on leadership and governance in regards to our children, I feel that it's important. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Flores.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will share with the committee that I've had extensive, very lengthy conversations with folk who are very worried and folk who are very passionate about trying something different. I just wanted to acknowledge that I am grateful to the conversations we had with them. But I, after having had an opportunity to listen to a lot of folk, and there was a lot of fear that there's the potential of individuals sitting there and that we have this split room where folk aren't collaborating and that nothing of benefit is coming forth. I believe that ultimately there'll be resistance at the beginning. There's going to be conflict. Nobody likes having somebody looking over their shoulder. That's going to be absolutely a part of that first layer of tension. But I am hopeful that on the back end of that, we'll see collaboration, we'll see the benefit. And I do agree with the senator that we do have to pay real close attention if we're not putting parameters and we end up having more of a political standoff where jurisdictions are sending individuals strictly to create chaos and not to really provide any real benefit, that we have a responsibility to come back and say, maybe we have to amend this, provide further guidance, put in place some better parameters. But I also heard from the local jurisdictions that oftentimes they request access to data, request access to different information that is simply not shared. So having these four folk in the room will provide a bridge to allow for some of these jurisdictions to get some information immediately, to get a first-hand perspective of what's the information that's being shared and how is that being dissected. And then along with that, there is a concern that leadership outside of the board is too powerful, and that sometimes that power isn't being challenged. And I hope that these four folk that are coming in can provide some substantive pushback and create that real wall that we need there at times. And I appreciate the advocates of the bill kind of really allowing me to dissect and walk the bill in that way, so I will be supporting it.
Thank you. Seeing no one else, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. Thank you. I have Senator Titus and Senator Neal. Motion carries. Senator Hammond, will you take the floor statement? You know I will. You get all the rest, too.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jen Sturm Gaynor, Committee Policy Analyst. The next bill on work session is Assembly Bill 207, which is sponsored by Assembly Members Gonzalez and Nguyen. We heard this bill on May 5th. The bill authorizes the Board of Trustees of a school district or the governing body of a charter school to purchase and maintain insurance against any liability arising out of a pupil's participation in a work-based learning program. The bill also prohibits a school district or charter school from charging a pupil or the parent or legal guardian of a pupil for the cost of such insurance coverage. Senator Hammond proposed an amendment to allow a school district or charter school governing body to accept gifts, grants, and donations to purchase and maintain such insurance. Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to amend and do pass Assembly Bill 207. It's been moved by Senator Hammond. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Senator Neal. Any discussion? Senator Buck and then Senator Donate. Oh, Senator Buck.
Thank you, Chair Lang. I will be voting no today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. I have a no from Senator Buck and Senator Titus. The motion carries. Senator Donate, will you take this? I know. I just couldn't play that game.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jen Sturm Gaynor, Committee Policy Analyst. The next bill is Assembly Bill 241, which was presented by Assemblywoman Mosca on May 15th. The bill requires a public high school pupil to enroll in the courses and credits required by the State Board of Education to receive a college and career-ready high school diploma. The bill also prescribes certain requirements to receive a CCR diploma and endorsements, outlines certain circumstances in which students are not required to enroll in such courses and credits, and specifies certain implementation dates for the bill which depend upon school district populations. The bill sponsor proposed an amendment which does the following. One, it adds Assemblywoman Hanson as a co-sponsor and Senator Buck as a joint sponsor. 2, it deletes sections 1.3, 1.5, and 1.7 from the bill concerning requirements necessary to receive a CCR diploma and college-ready endorsement, and instead requires the State Board of Education to establish diploma requirements by regulation pursuant to Nevada Revised Statutes 390.600 and 390.605, and that such regulations do not become effective unless approved by the Legislative Commission. 3, have the meeting to opt out of a CCR diploma involve the pupil and counselor and, to the extent practicable, the parent or legal guardian and an administrator, and requires the pupil, counselor, parent or legal guardian, and administrator all sign off on opting out of the CCR diploma. And finally, it adds in Section 1 that a pupil must enroll in the courses of study and credits required to earn a CCR diploma or any equivalent or higher diploma offered by a district. Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to amend and do pass AB 241. I have Senator Buck. Do I have a second? Second, Senator Titus. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Senator Hammond, will you take this? Yep. I just had to do it one time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jen Sturm Gaynor, Committee Policy Analyst. Final bill on work session today is Assembly Bill 282, which was presented by Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong on May 15th. The bill requires school districts to provide a monthly subsidy to full-time substitute teachers for the purchase of health insurance. In order to receive the subsidy, such teachers must provide proof of health insurance coverage. The bill prohibits a school district or a public school from taking certain actions that would prevent a substitute teacher from qualifying for this subsidy. And at this time, Madam Chair, there are no proposed amendments.
Okay, I'll take a motion to do pass on Assembly Bill 282. It's been moved by Senator Flores. Do I have a second? Second by Senator Nail. Any discussion? Senator Buck.
The fact that charter schools can give paid time off and also give substitute teachers their health insurance with $1,500 less per student, I think that we can do this. However, I'd go about it a completely different way. I don't believe in subsidies. So with that, I'll be voting no.
Thank you. Any more discussion? Okay, all those in favor of, is it amended? No. Do pass on Assembly Bill 282, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. Titus and Buck are noes. The motion carries. Oh, Senator Hammond, will you take this too? Okay, and that is the end of our work session. And so let me put away my notebook, and we will open the hearing on Assembly Bill 264. And when you're ready, you may begin. And welcome.
Is it afternoon? It is. All set? Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the Senate Committee on Education. My name is Angie Taylor, for the record, and I am the proud Assemblywoman from Assembly District 27, and I'm excited to present Assembly Bill 260 264 with my co-presenter, he'll introduce himself. Mr. Mailer will introduce himself in just a moment. Just as a first, and let me say this, thank you. I know it's a crazy week, so thank you so much for taking the time to hear my bill today, our bill today. And we appreciate it. A little bit of background. Nevada schools are populated by a variety of students with ranging cultures and backgrounds, ways of life, and it's vitally important that we recognize these different aspects of the students that attend our school when we're crafting policy. Excuse me. One area of need in this regard relates to school absences. Currently, there are provisions both in statute and in school district regulations that specifically provide for the excusal of certain absences, often often related to health circumstances. But however, the statute does not, and the regulations may not, account for observance of religious holidays, and Assembly Bill 264 seeks to change that. Part of what you'll see is although religious holidays are excused absences, they still show up as an absence in the student's record, and that's what this is hoping to correct along the way. I'll give you a personal example. In Reno, Nevada, there is someone who happens to be a friend who's a big community advocate who owns several car dealerships, and every senior who has perfect attendance during their senior year goes into a raffle. And there's a drawing, and they win a brand-new car. Not for a year, not for a lease, but the senior gets a brand-new car. But to qualify, they must have perfect attendance. And when you have excused absences, then it still shows up as an absence, and this seeks to correct that. Really quickly, just to go through the bill really quickly, Section 3 states that a pupil that's absent from school due to observance of a religious holiday may not be deprived of any award or eligibility. Section 4 of the bill contains school district rules on absences and their reporting, and it adds that certain absences for the observance of religious holidays may not be counted as absences in such reporting. Section 5 outlines that days on which a student is absent due to an observance of a religious holiday must be credited toward required days of attendance, back to the example I gave you, as long as the student has completed their coursework. There's no excuse for that. And then certainly, finally, your parent or legal guardian has to, Section 6 talks about the notification that has to come from your parent or legal guardian. I'm going to turn it over now to Mr. Malin, who will share some other comments. With your permission, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be heard today. For the record, my name is Elliot Mallon on behalf of the Anti-Defamation League of Nevada. First, we are incredibly thankful for Assemblywoman Taylor not only sponsoring this bill, but being an absolute champion on this issue. As a product of the Clark County School District, way back when, I'm grateful for the opportunities and experience I was given growing up here in Nevada. We always hear about how subpar our education system is. I don't always believe that. I think I got a pretty good education and I had pretty fantastic teachers here in Nevada. However, as a member of the Jewish community, there was always one thing missing from that opportunity. Every fall, as school was kicking off, the Jewish holidays would come around and I would miss school because my religion required my observance for those days. I would always do my makeup work, always turn in a note for my parents, and always let the teachers know ahead of time. When it came time to graduate, I learned that there would be a drawing for a new car for perfect attendance for students that hadn't missed a day of school. Unfortunately for me and other students, other Nevadans growing up here, that was not something that I had the opportunity to qualify for, all because my religion had required that I be absent from school on certain days. Recently, a student at a high school here in northern Nevada was trying to notify their school that they would be absent for Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the Jewish year, and they were given a hard time by the faculty and staff at that school. While that was not something that is already permissible, and I recognize that, it is a reality for some of our students, and it was a reality that I faced too. What we are intending to do with this legislation is to withdraw these days from being, quote, absent from the school for the purpose of perfect attendance awards and for the district metrics that are required by the absenteeism index score within the Nevada State Performance Framework. Further, these days will not count towards the truancy metrics that we currently use. I'm going to skip the technical portions of the bill because my friend, the assembly member, did that for me, so thank you. So again, our goal here today is to protect Nevadans and their ability to practice their faiths without fear of negative repercussions within our school system for missing school. There are numerous Nevadans that were just like me and have grown up here attending Nevada's public schools and missing school due to religious observances. This bill is not meant to favor any faith, but is to level the playing field for all students and protecting their individual liberties while also ensuring that their participation in their faith is not a negative reflection of their schooling. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the stakeholders and their collaboration and willingness to work with us on this bill in providing language that accomplishes our goals, so I'm very appreciative of that. It also does not put the school districts in a negative place. Senator Orenshaw earlier this week gave everybody a blue pin. It is currently Jewish American Heritage Month. These blue pins are a symbol to fight anti-Semitism, and I want to make it very clear that I don't believe our school districts are ever trying to negatively impact us, and I want to make it clear that we are very appreciative of all the work that they've put in with us to make this work, and I know how much they want our students to have the same opportunity. So thank you for your time today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
If I may, Madam Chair, I'd like to just speak a little bit to an amendment that should be available on Nellis, and hopefully you have it there in front of you. Speaking of the school district and being partners in this, excuse me, because we're talking about attendance, they made a recommendation that Mr. Mallon and I discussed, and it really, there are 4 parts, really 2 parts of it. One is there's something called swatting that happens now, and that's when there is the false threat of violence or guns or bombs that's happening all over, and in particular in our schools. About a week and a half ago, there was a threat that really was a national threat, but it showed up really heavily in the Washoe County School District and a couple of other districts in our rural areas. 14,000 students missed school on that day because of the threat of violence. And so one of the recommended amendments would allow for those absences to also be able to be excused absences when there's the threat of violence or danger in that regard. The second recommendation, and again, you'll see this on the potential amendment that's in your packets and on Ellis, is right now current law requires regs require that when the student is sick for a day, then they need to have a doctor's note. And we're certainly recognize that there are many of our families in our state that either don't have a primary care physician, or maybe they don't have insurance, and maybe their parents can't afford to take them to the doctor because they're missing one day. And we want to encourage students, if you aren't feeling well, then to stay home. The second part of the amendment is to say that when they're missing a day for being sick, actually up to 3 days. After 3 days, you'll need to have a note. Then a parent's note is sufficient, because let's be honest, most people can't get into the doctor in 2 or 3 days, quite honestly. So that's also for your consideration as well. And we stand ready to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So I'll entertain any questions from the committee. Senator Buck.
Thank you, Chair Lang. I often struggle with this as a building principle with attendance, not with per se the religious holidays. I often wonder why we don't build our calendars, our school calendars around those days, and give the entire student body those days off. Where I have a problem is attendance is on the Nevada School Performance Framework. And you're really putting schools, school leaders, teachers who represent that school kind of in a precarious situation, because inevitably, in order to get credit and not be dinged on that rubric for chronic absenteeism, it's on the rubric, and it gets held against that school or that leader in their stars. And so I just wonder where that comes into play. I often think that a lot of times we need to just remove attendance, and I know that seems alarming when we're all about student achievement and raising the bar on student achievement. I often thought, why are we holding, during a pandemic, attendance against a school when we're telling kids don't come to school sick? And so, I just wonder if you could address the Nevada School Performance Framework, potentially how maybe we could lessen that, the attendance weight on that rubric, and increase SGP, which is when a teacher has them, the growth of that.
Elliot Mallon for the record. Chair, is it okay if I go direct? Go direct. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Buck, for that question. Section 5, sub 6, actually addresses exactly that within this context. So we are actually not going to be counting these days, these missed days, against that rubric or that framework. And that was done very particularly so we don't threaten the standing of the schools. Now, when it comes to absence and the way we do things within the school district, I think that's a little bit above my pay grade. And I'm happy to have other conversations about that. But it's really important for us to know that within this bill is contained a metric and a mechanism so that the way the schools are not harmed in allowing students to miss for religious observances.
And then also, if I may, there are many different religions. And so I was wondering if there's any other, any other religious observances outside of the Jewish faith that potentially this is impacted, days that are impacted, and that and if this applies across the board, and do they just write religious observance on a note?
Elliot Mallon, for the record, thank you again, Senator Buck, because you reminded me of another thing. This bill is not just for the Jewish community, so I want to make that very clear. This is for all Nevadans. Our Catholic neighbors have Ash Wednesday. I know oftentimes their students still go to school. I also know that it can be very difficult for the parents to juggle that. Our intention here is to also allow that kind of a day to be counted for this student. We also have our neighbors that are of the Muslim faith that have where Ramadan will fluctuate throughout the calendar year because Islam, like Judaism, operates on a lunar calendar. So it's really hard for us to plan ahead to give all these students these days off because these fluctuate every year. Our goal here is to make this a level playing field for every student. It doesn't matter what faith they practice. When it comes to sending in a note, we also have a metric within here that this has to be an advance notification to the school in writing. So that way, a parent will write a note saying, my son or daughter will miss because of, in my case, Yom Kippur. This will be done within 3 days before that holiday in writing to the administration at the school. So that way, the school is notified so they can prepare, the teachers can prepare makeup work. We're not telling students they don't have to do the work still. We're just removing this. For the purpose of the student, it's going to look exactly the same to them. They do the work, they have to do everything. For the purpose of the administration and the attendance, that's where things will basically change. I hope that answered your question. Thank you.
Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too had concerns regarding the numbers of potential days a student might miss, recognizing that in throughout Nevada, not just in Clark County, we have a number of different faiths with different observations, and many that I don't know what special days they have. And then just wondering what that accountability is. But I didn't really see that they had to have a note in advance in 3 days. What section was that? I'm sorry.
Elliot Mallon for the record. Thank you for that question. Let's see. It is going to be, it should be section 4, subsection 2.
Okay.
Where it says that a student shall not be counted as absent for the purpose of religious observances if the notice is given by the legal guardian of the student, and it should have it. This was the amendment actually in the assembly.
Okay. I'm sorry, that's why I'm not seeing it.
Yep. And then on top of that, we actually made it 5 days. So these are 5 floating days total. And we came up with that number partially just from experience of what comes up for some of our faiths that do have these days throughout the year. And we found that to be the happy middle ground with all the stakeholders. 10 days is too much. 5 days seem to be the perfect number.
Great, thank you, because we do know that kids are kids, and if they have an opportunity to miss a school day and they come up with a good excuse, they'll frequently use that. So thank you. I'm certainly supportive of it. I just wanted to make sure that we also had some monitoring of it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, if you want to step back, we'll take public comment. Anyone in Carson City wishing to speak in favor of Assembly Bill 285, please come to the front. Oh, I said the wrong one. Sorry, 264. I have too many papers on my desk. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Alex Tanchek with Silver State Government Relations, representing the Charter School Association of Nevada, as well as a coalition of district-sponsored charter schools in Washoe County that includes High Desert Montessori, Honors Academy of Literature, Mariposa Academy, and Sierra Nevada Academy Charter School. Speaking in support of SB 264, we want to thank the sponsor for bringing this bill forward. Religious observances is part of a cultural experience students bring to a school that enriches all students' education, and we don't think that should be held against the student. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person, please.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Dylan Shaver here on behalf of the Washoe County School District. Just wanted to reiterate our thanks to the sponsor and to Mr. Malin for bringing this piece of legislation. Additionally, for being so open to addressing other concerns we had in this space that were sort of late breaking. And we look forward to working with everybody to get this done.
Great, thank you. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. For the record, KB Mejia with the Ferrado Company. I'm here today on behalf of the Nevada Association of School Boards. NASB is in support of this bill. We believe it provides an inclusive environment for students of different backgrounds. We want to thank the sponsor for bringing this bill forward and ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else in Carson City, is there anyone in Las Vegas wishing to speak in support of 264? I got it right. BPS, is there anyone on the lines wishing to speak in favor of Assembly Bill 264?
Testify in support of AB 264. Press star 9 to take your place in the queue. There are no callers wishing to testify in support at this time.
Thank you. Anyone in Carson City wishing to speak in opposition? Seeing none, anyone in Las Vegas wishing to speak in opposition? And BPS, is there anyone on the phone lines?
To testify in opposition of AB 264, press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Moment, Chair.
Okay. Anyone wishing to speak in neutral in Carson City?
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the Senate Education Committee. My name is Katie Broughton, representing the Nevada Department of Education. We are speaking in neutral today as we review the details of the amendment that was posted this morning. Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mary Przensky, here representing Nevada Association of School Superintendents, and we are also in the neutral position pending further review of the additional amendment that was posted this morning, and we are conscious of the timeline, so we will be looking quickly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Patricia Haddad, Director of Government Relations for the Clark County School District. We were in support of the bill as originally written, do have some concerns around the potential amendment and need some additional review, particularly in regards to the absences due to safety concerns and the parameters that might exist around that and any sort of limitations that would exist in order to ensure that we're still fostering environments where kids feel welcome and that we're encouraging students to show up to school every day. And then in addition, still continuing to review this piece around the medical conditions. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Anyone in Las Vegas wishing to speak in neutral on AB 264? BPS, is there anyone on the phones?
To testify neutral to AB 264, press star 9 to take your place in the queue. There are no callers wishing to testify neutral at this time.
Okay, Assemblywoman Taylor. And we have a quick question. Could we ask that before? Okay.
Absolutely.
Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on the medical conditions, because I know this is something that we talked about without having the note, because there are instances where a person is sick, and we talked about, like, in the case of a female, you have severe cramps and you can't go to school. I mean, and that doesn't necessarily require a doctor's note, but your family knows that this is a problem and that you can't manage, right? Because you don't know what's going on, right? And so at the end of the day, I think I was just trying to figure out, because I know CCSD came up in opposition, but I think, if you could just clarify that a little bit more, because I think that.
Excuse me, Senator, they came up in neutral.
Oh, they came up in neutral?
Yes.
Okay. Well, but that's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, if you could just clarify, like, those kinds of things.
Thank you, Senator. Angie Taylor for the record. Madam Chair, we can go direct. Thank you. Thank you, Senator. That's a really good question. And those instances are exactly why the Washoe County School District approached, and we had a conversation surrounding those types of instances when it still takes a note from your parent, but it isn't something that would ordinarily take you to the doctor, the child to the doctor, send the child to the doctor. It gives a couple of days for that to, in that case or others, when the child is sick and cannot attend, the parent, guardian gets to make that decision, contact the school, still gets to work, but that's not something that would send someone to the doctor. And it really helps to remove a burden, we believe, from those families that either don't have a doctor, parents work, can't afford it, but still allows the educational process to take place. So thank you so much for the question, Senator.
Okay. And Senator Buck.
So I just had a chance to review the amendment, and I was just wondering, do you think that this will cause more threats to schools?
Do I think that it will? Well, I haven't.
I think it incentivizes people are threatening schools if there's potentially going to be a day off. So I completely support the initial bill, but I'm a little concerned about that in the amendment.
I appreciate that, Senator Buck. I would think that much like the religious absences, it won't look a lot different if we're able. We're again looking forward to speaking with those that have some concerns surrounding that. There's certainly valid concerns, but it won't look much different from the absence from the child. What would be different is how the school registers that absence.
Okay. Assemblywoman, if you'd like to do your closing remarks.
Just thank you so much for hearing the bill. Certainly, I'm grateful for those who shared some other things for us to think about, and we're going to get to work and get this back, and we look forward to 2 days later. That's all we have left to get to work session, so we're going to work on it. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And with that, we'll close the hearing on Assembly Bill 264, and I'll open the hearing on Assembly Bill 285.
I have a co-preventers. I'll go ahead and get started as my co-presenters join me again. Madam Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, thank you for an opportunity to present Assembly Bill 285. Again, my name is Angie Taylor, and the proud Assembly representative from District 27 in beautiful Reno, Nevada. You see, I have co-presenters with me here today, Dr. Norris Dupree, Dr. Ashley Greenwald, and then actually Dr. Paul Lamarca is going to share. So this is a doctor day here in the Senate Committee on Education. I really want to just get to why we need this bill. We know we're all aware that we have a restorative justice bill that's already on the records that was passed by the late Tyrone Thompson when he was still with us, and we certainly appreciate that. But what we have learned is that when restorative practices, when restorative justice first came into play for various reasons, it was approved July 1, 2019, was to go into effect in August 2019. 6 months later, COVID hit, sent everybody home. elevated those traumatic experiences for children, and all of the mental health issues that we all are well aware have come more so to the forefront. Really what this bill intends to do is to kind of balance that. I've called this bill a nuance bill. This is when you dance with both sides of it, if you will. One, this bill really is focused on students first, supports the students that need help. One of the things that we know from research is that oftentimes when students show out at school when there's a behavior issue, it's because they're dealing with some trauma, they're dealing with something at home, they're dealing with something that is a mental health issue, whether it's homelessness or whatever the case may be, they need help. And that's why restorative practices came into play. It also allows us to take a look at what's the proportionality, or in most cases, disproportionality for those kids who are impacted but from the same behavior situation, same disciplinary background, but greater infractions. Research shows from those students who are black and brown. That's the data, that's research nationally, in our state and in our districts, not because of anything other than that's the data. And so this allows us to say, how do we make sure that we're treating every child the same, giving every child the supports that they need, and creating an educational environment where teachers can teach safely and students can learn safely. The second part is students first and foremost. The second part, of course, is our educators. We understand that we are in an educator crisis here in our state. When you talk to educators, and there's some research on this in our own state, there are two things that are really important to educators. One is they need more pay, and we've been working on that. And then secondly is safety. And someone indicated there's some data that says there are not more disciplinary issues today than there were in 2019. So maybe people are safe, but there's one thing to be safe. It's something else to feel safe. And teachers don't feel safe. Other students don't feel safe. So what this bill also includes is, how do we equip teachers? How do we give them tools? How do we give them the training that they need so that they will know how to deal with these issues when they show up? And that's why we have Dr. Norris Dupree is going to talk a little bit about that in just a moment. But this is a complicated issue. I've been in this building like 10 minutes. I've been saying that because it's been actually 101 days. But 10 minutes, let's go with that. Who's counting, right? But this is nuance, because it's a balance between supporting the children that need help and then supporting the teachers that also need help. And so one of the things that I've landed on is as I've spoken with many times with stakeholders on both sides of this issue. We need to discipline the kids. We need to make sure we correct the behavior issues. We do. We need to support teachers. We need to make sure that they're safe, that they can teach, and we do. This is a nuanced issue, and I've nuanced this and amended this and so much that I might be the only one left that's happy with this bill. And that's how I know I think I got it right. So again, I'm going to turn it over to, with your permission, Madam Chair. I think all of that conversation, as much work as it takes, has made this a better bill, and there still may be some more work to come. I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenters. And we'll have Dr. Norris Dupree, who actually teaches in our school district, who is a psychologist, been working with students with behavior issues as long as I've known him. He will share some information, and then we'll have Dr. Paul Lamarcker from the Washoe. I'm going to step back from the Washoe County School District to talk about what this looks like from a district standpoint. And then, because this is a well-rounded approach, a part of this is how do we support the student and how do we support the teacher, Dr. Ashley Greenwald, who's a professor of education and human development at the University of Nevada, Reno, in charge of their MTSS program, multi-tiered systems of support. Sorry, acronyms, multi-tiered systems of support. We'll chat as well. And then finally, and we're moving as fast as we can, you got a whole lot of amendments, but you also got a grid. I'm going to take you through this grid real quick so you can see what we've done. So thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the opportunity to present. I'm going to say some things that
Sir, will you state your name?
Oh, Norris Dupree, sorry. Dr. Norris Dupree, I apologize. Dr. Norris Dupree, I'm a marriage and family therapist, licensed alcohol and drug abuse counselor, and also a school psychologist. And so, once again, thank you for the opportunity. I want to state that restorative justice works for the right person at the right level can be very effective. Is what happens is when we try to take kids that behaviors are escalated and are callous and try to put them into this restorative justice. In other words, we try to make one size fit all. I want to say before I begin is that we have to be careful because we really want kids to be successful. And in wanting kids to be successful, we have to understand that all kids need different things, different approaches to be successful. And so, as far as restorative justice goes, I think it's very important that we look at all aspects of the behavior. Number one, does a kid have empathy when they engage in behavior, or are they a callous, malicious individual? Does the kid need extra support, or is this a one-time event? Part of restorative justice, and I really believe, especially when it comes to really bringing a kid back, we want to get like the risk factor. Can they do this behavior again, or are they at risk of doing this behavior again? And if they are at risk of doing this behavior again, what interventions are needed so that the risk factor can be lowered? This is very important. We are concerned. Sometimes people will say, well, it's all about mental health, and I am a champion of mental health. But one of the concerns is pertaining to mental health is that we like to link mental health with all bad behavior. And one of the dangers of that is that when a consequence is not given, what are we teaching the child or the individual? Because we have to understand that even with mental health, even with development, that consequences can negate behavior. And so this is important as we're talking about restorative justice. So number one is, as far as the school go, we do really want to understand risk management. And does it impede safety? And that's the question, like, is this kid's behavior impeding the safety of the class or the school? And if it is, like, what do we need to do to bring this kid or to help this kid? But also, too, what do we need to do for the other students to keep them safe? Because sometimes I feel like we're so focused upon the kid that does, that's doing the behavior, that we sometimes forget the victim. And so this is very important. As far as restorative justice goes, is concerned, should this be applied to kids with high-risk offenses? I think there's a difference between individuals that are, let's just say, gang-motivated versus individuals that has anger issues. Post-traumatic stress, dealing with individuals that are dealing with like grief and loss. I'm not saying that individuals from gangs do not have like any of these issues, but restorative justice says that we need to be able to apply a system to the right level of behavior, and that individuals can learn from the consequences they receive. If an individual do not learn from the consequences that they receive, then as a system, we are not helping them. To make a long story short, I think that it's very important as we move on and we're talking about restorative justice that we be able to, number one, advocate with the right mind and not advocate through enabling our children. We should be developing consistency and limits and boundaries. These are all core issues that people need to be successful in life, needs to be successful in the home, and need to be also successful in the school setting. And if somebody is reoffending, and we need to correct it, we need to make sure that there is not inequitable practices that are going on. We need to make sure that we're looking at these things. So restorative justice to me is very imperative of how we move and how we look at this situation. We need to look at each kid individually and systematically and make sure that it's being applied and making sure that teachers are being educated and applying it, and administrators are applying it equally across board, but most of all, making sure that the children are learning from the restorative justice practices that we implement. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the record, Paul LaMarca, Washoe County School District, and I will try and be brief. I know that you have limited time. On behalf of...
We have the rest of this meeting for you all.
Then I'm going to take a lot of time. Thank you. On behalf of Superintendent Enfield and the Washoe County School Districts, we do support this legislation. We applaud Assemblywoman Taylor and her co-sponsors in taking on very difficult legislation, trying to create a balance that we so desperately need in our schools. We do think the current draft, with a couple of exceptions, and I'll mention one of those, does provide principals and district administration with the tools it needs in order to effectively manage behavior, and at the same time emphasizes the use of restorative practices to benefit all students within the learning environment. Let me tell you that in Washoe County School District, we presented data to our Board of Trustees toward the end of March, and we looked at some trend information. And from 2019, we looked from 2018 to current year. From 2019 to 2023, we actually saw a 15% reduction in overall major behavioral events. However, during that same time frame, we saw an 8% increase in what we classify as violent behaviors. So on the one hand, things are going down overall, but in terms of violence, things are going up. Washoe County Juvenile Services has shared some of their data. Community-wide, same trends. Overall reduction in referrals to juvenile services, but violent behaviors have been on the rise, especially since the pandemic. Safety is our priority. That's for all students, all staff, and the student who's committing the offense. And so it is important to know that traditional exclusionary practices, and this is, I think, part of what Dr. Dupree was saying, can and must work together with restorative practices, and that's why we support the bill. I do want to mention one area of high concern that we have is with students who are protected under McKinney-Vento. Those are students who are homeless and students that are living in foster care. Language, well-intended language that was passed in 2021 has been carried forward, and essentially that language makes it virtually impossible to exclude a student who is homeless or in foster care, even if they were to be in possession of a loaded firearm, battery on staff. So we do think that that is an important area that requires an amendment, and we have provided language to the sponsors, and if they see fit, they will forward those to you. So again, on behalf of Washoe County School District, and we do have a trustee here who I believe was going to speak in support as well, we do support the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. This is Dr. Ashley Greenwald for the record. I'm a research professor at the University of Nevada, Reno in the Department of Education and Human Development. I also am the director of Nevada's Multi-Tiered Systems of Support project that we have been implementing in the state of Nevada for the past 10 years. So I just wanted to start off to share a little bit, what we've heard today is we want to move this bill forward. We want students to have contact with restorative practices, but how do we make sure that we equip and empower the schools and the teachers to be able to do this work? And I'm here today to share with you, we do know what works. We actually have evidence of this in Nevada. However, we also know that systems change takes time and it takes resources. And I want to share a little bit about that with you. So I'm a professor. I'm going to share a little evidence. The National Implementation Research Network, which I'll refer to as NERN, talks about how to effectively implement evidence-based practices. And when we talk about evidence-based practices, I want you to be thinking about restorative practices is evidence-based. It does have demonstrated outcomes for students if implemented correctly. So how do we make sure that that happens? What we want to make sure is that we have active and consistent leadership. That involves a teaming process. Teaming's both at the school and at the level of the district. We also need to make sure that we have clear and shared implementation goals, so we know what it is that we're going to be working on, that there's competence, so that we make sure that people know what it is that they're trying to teach, and that we have capacity building, right? So if we're expecting educators to be able to implement these practices in their classrooms, how do we know and how do we ensure that they have the knowledge to be successful in that? And I will share with you too that we know from research that training alone is ineffective. Not very much of the information from a training gets actually implemented at the level of the classroom, which therefore does not result in the student outcomes that we want. So what do we do about that? We also know that we need to make sure that we have continuous communication and stakeholder engagement. Data-informed decision-making. We've got to collect data and make sure that we're learning from those data to see what's working and what's not working, and that we adapt our practices to the local needs of the community. From the evidence-based practices in schools perspective, we've got to make sure that, like Dr. Dupree was saying, that we have practices that are not one size fits all, right? We have to assess the need at the local level and make sure that we select the right practice. And when we're talking about restorative practices, there's many different types of practices that can go into a restorative approach. We need to make sure that we're building that capacity, assessing the fidelity to make sure that it's being implemented as we have designed it to be implemented, and that we're monitoring the progress and making sure that we have sustainability of those practices. So here's sort of the flip side of that, right? We know what we need. Here's the alternative. When evidence-based practices are not implemented with fidelity, we have reduced effectiveness, we have inconsistent results, we have misinterpretation and misapplication of what's being intended, we have wasted resources, and we have frustration and disillusionment, and that can lead to the perception that the practice is ineffective, and that can actually hinder the further implementation. So that's kind of what we're seeing in this space right now. Like some of my co-presenters were sharing, this bill rolled out right before the pandemic, right? We didn't have the adequate resources invested. Everything changed. Students came back with more intensive health needs, and the workforce had diminished. So what do we do to move forward? We need a systems framework approach, and I'm here today to share with you that multi-tiered systems of support is an evidence-based systems framework approach that we actually have local evidence that works in the state of Nevada. Currently, we're implementing in over 200 school sites, and our Technical Assistance Center at the university is already on the evidence-based practice registry for the state of Nevada. So part of that work in MTSS is assessing readiness and capacity to implement these practices at every local school that we work with, that we are able to engage the school and the district in teaming, that we develop and implement action plans. So how are we going to identify specific tasks that have to roll out in order to see that effective outcome that we want? Provide training and ongoing coaching. Okay, right? You heard me say earlier, training alone is not effective. So that's what we need to provide to the staff. And then for the students, we need to make sure that those staff members are teaching the skills through both universal to the whole student body and targeted supports to students with higher identified needs. And that's that restorative piece, right? Those are those practices. We also need to make sure, like my co-presenter, Dr. Lamarca, was sharing, that we address the discipline in a consistent manner. When we have inconsistent disciplinary practices, that's what results in disproportionality. That's some of that inequity that we see at districts, and so we really need to tighten that up. Making sure that we're offering ongoing support, using data for continuous improvement. And when I talk about data, I'm talking about both fidelity data, so the implementation, did we do this right? And the outcome data, are we seeing the results that we want for those students? And that we engage our stakeholders and share those outcomes. So before I conclude today, I just want to hear a quick message, is that the supports and the practices that we put in place are for the students. The systems that we need to put in place are to support the staff members in their success. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Greenwald, and to all the co-presenters. Just overall, you heard the objective of what we want to do with Assembly Bill 285, what it looks like in the schools, what it looks like from a district standpoint, and what it takes for the implementation that can make this successful. So with that being said, we all stand for questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. So Washoe mentioned something about an amendment that they had. Is that in your amendments that you have here?
No, it is not. There's some, we're going to be looking at a bill that didn't go forward, and that's part of in that bill, at those things that that we may want to pull over that can strengthen this bill. And the McKinney-Vento piece regarding homeless students and foster care students is a part of that.
2 days.
So, I know. I know. I got it.
Okay, Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your advocacy. I'm just curious, though, you use the term in here, staff success, but where is the avenue for student success in this bill? I'm not really sure I see, it defines when you can suspend somebody, but where's the compelling evidence that this is for student success, too?
Angie Taylor, for the record. But the restorative justice piece is really about the behavioral issues of students and how in addressing in a consistent way, in a way that has the fidelity, as Dr. Greenwald mentioned, that allows the students to be able to stay in the educational environment and to be successful. So the focus of the bill really has to do with how it's correcting the behavior environment, the behavior of a student, and create an educational environment so that the student can continue to be involved in school and succeed. So this isn't about the academic support of a student in and of itself. It's about the behavioral supports of a student.
So under this, because the bill hasn't been amended, and I haven't seen, all the conceptual kind of thoughts on it, but it seems like I'm not seeing a pathway for a student to succeed and what educational plans are going to be put in place. The last thing I would want to see, I want our student teachers protected, absolutely. But I also want to make sure that the student who's suspended isn't just sitting home on a laptop, that there's something in place that we never throw a child away. And I just want to make sure there's always something available for them. And I would love to see where that is in this bill, that there's got to be a plan for that child's success after you've done the research. And I am all about removing a child from a classroom immediately for safety purposes, not only for the child, but certainly the other students and certainly for the teachers. And I like holding somebody accountable for their behaviors. But again, I just wonder about the plan for student success. So anyway, thank you for what you're trying to do. I'm just not convinced it's here. Thank you.
If I may, Madam Chair, I'm going to ask Dr. Lamarca to address that some, and I'll show you in the bill where it talks about the plan for the student success.
Thank you for the question. I do think in Section 5, there you will find, and it's repeated in a couple of other sections, any student who is removed either temporarily from a classroom or suspended out of school for more than 2 days, the school has to create a plan to support them academically. During the time when they are out, we have to provide for educational services as well as behavioral and social emotional supports. It's also implied, if not explicit in the bill, that for longer term suspensions or removals, for example, to an alternative educational setting, that the schools have to develop transition plans that allow a student to be successful upon their return. This is actually one of the stronger components of the bill we support, is the thoughtful planning of support for the student if you have to use exclusionary measures.
Great, thank you. And that's in the amendment, or is it in the original bill?
I believe that's in Section 5 of the original bill.
If I may, Angie Taylor, for the record, if I may, Senator, if you look at, I got and staff was working very, very hard to get us a mock-up of the proposed amendment. We got it late last night. It should be on Nellis. If you grab that and you get to page 15, it talks about a plan that's being developed, a plan that needs to be developed for the student based upon those details as mentioned by Dr. Lamarca. And because the intention absolutely is you don't get to go home for a 2-day vacation.
So you don't want to reward bad behavior by sending a child home.
Exactly, and that absolutely does not. And in those cases when a child needs to stay home for a suspension, or even in an expulsion, which, by the way, according to the NRS, just means that it means a child is removed from their home school. It doesn't mean they're just kicked out and they're on the street and so on. That's not what expulsion means. But even in those cases, the educational supports are there. The plan has to be written and shared on the front end with and this is how you get reinstated and get back in.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the
I
question.
apologize. It was section 5.5,
5.5.
not 5.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Senator Neal.
So I had a question on I'm going to take this combined.
I've been cold worse than that.
Section 3 and Section 4, I'm going to take that together because there's language in both sections for people with a disability, and then making sure that they get free and actually an appropriate education that they're supposed to have. So do we currently, either from the Washoe side or maybe from the CCSD side, do we have any data on how that currently works now and how students have been treated who actually have an IEP who are expelled, and whether or not they're being appropriately educated in the new setting in which they may be in? So let's say in the South, if an IEP student was sent to Peterson, how do we know that if they have an IEP, they're being educated? And then what's the remedy if the parent finds out expulsion, IEP, and the student was not educated?
Madam Chair, to Senator Neal, thank you for the question. What I can share with you, Paula Mark for the record, what I can share with you is a student with disabilities, if they were to commit some of the acts that are talked about in the bill, such as battery on a staff, distribution of drugs, possession of a weapon, some of these big offenses, IDEA allows them to be removed for 45 days pending what's called a manifestation determination. Manifestation determination is where the IEP team, which includes the parent, must sit with the school to determine whether the behavior had a relationship to the student's disability. If it doesn't, and that's a team decision, not a district decision, then the student can be disciplined like you would discipline a student who's in general education. If it is a manifestation, the limit, regardless of the offense, is 45 days. Once the student finds themselves in this alternative setting, we do everything possible to implement the IEP as written. Now, some of these settings are limited in some of the accommodations that they can provide. Within Washoe County, I cannot speak to Clark County. We essentially have two separate sites that can be used for alternate placements. One of them is primarily for general education and can also support students who are general resource, having an IEP that's general resource. We have another site that is really designed to support students with significant disabilities. That's actually where Dr. Dupree is working. It's called Turning Point. Students who might be in a CLS program or a strategies program, they would likely be sent to Turning Point during that period of time. I do think that the emphasis around restorative practices here does enable us to better support the students you are talking about.
Madam Chair, follow-up, please. So I appreciate that answer. So I want to go into section 4.5 around the plan. And the reason why I'm asking about the plan, and I'm going to ask you about the data, currently, from what I know, and I've heard this from teachers at CCSD level, and I don't know if you guys are all from the north, that there is a re-engagement plan in place. However, there has been, I guess, commentary that re-engagement plan is not actually followed for those students to be brought back into the school setting, that they are being suspended or expelled or removed, and then there is no re-engagement in order to bring them back on the prescribed timeline under the existing restorative justice practice. So how is it that the plan described in section 4.5 remedies the current issue that's currently at play, and making sure that if a plan is administered or created by teacher or local school precinct, that it is actually going to be followed and the student is going to be educated, right?
Angie Taylor for the record. I can't speak specifically about Clark County, but in the plan as we've put forward, it requires the data collection, to your data question, data collection on a quarterly basis. And the data is turned into the interim committee on education, the state superintendent, the board of trustees, so that the tracking of who's getting suspended and the supports that they have, and if the plans are being implemented and who has been trained is getting reported. Now, in terms of the day-to-day, how does a bill make sure that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be? That's when we rely upon the board of trustees. Here's the law. However it is that we end up, here's the law, and there's the expectation that the Board of Trustees is going to hold the superintendent responsible for those things happening on a regular basis.
So thank you for that. And so 2 points. Number one, I saw the data piece and I saw the Board of Trustees in here. 2 things need to happen, I think, because we've seen this in play for a long time. We've also seen the criticism of restorative justice or progressive discipline. Number one, I think school board of trustees should be included in any training that you do, because they cannot be in a position to determine whether or not it's effective if you've never walked through the training yourself. Nor should you be an arbiter, right, if you don't even understand the practice yourself and you're following rumor of what you believe it to be. Number 2, related to the data, like we currently have subcommittees around suspension now, I believe, at CCSD level. But sometimes, number one, it's hard to get the data. The data is not actionable. It's not being used in a way where it is determining behavior by the administration, where there is any kind of recalculation. And then in certain instances, when the public has asked for data, and although you're trying to remedy this, it has not been provided. So what's the penalty if they don't give it up?
Angie Taylor for the record. That's a very good question. I will say a couple of things as I'm taking some notes, including the Board of Trustees and training absolutely makes sense. They're a part of this whole piece. The data being reported publicly and being shared publicly, I think, is a really important piece as well. As a legislature, what do we do if we pass a law and then they just don't do it?
Well, I have plenty of suggestions on that point. So because we have engaged for several days this session, and it's not picking on anybody, about the lack of information in which when we ask a direct question and the information that we receive back. And so if we're going to make this actionable for children, for the system itself to perform, why not do a $10,000 a day penalty for failure to turn over that old data? Just saying.
Angie Taylor, for the record, I'm going to make a note. I'm going to make a note of that. Thank you, Senator.
Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the second question. As I've been hearing, yes, the students are protected and the teachers and education. What about the victims? Are they in this? I've looked at the amendment. I have our legal looking at it and wondering what's the recourse for a victim, whether it be the teacher or a fellow student.
Thank you for the question. For the record, Paul LaMarca, Senator Titus. It really lands in a couple of different places within the bill. So restorative practices is really a victim-centered approach. Now that shows up more when we're talking about certain practices more so than others. So for example, if part of what was used in a particular situation was restorative conferencing, that is specifically designed to provide a victim the opportunity to express what has happened to them, how it's impacted them, so that the offender can hopefully lean into empathy and understand that their behavior has real impact. The victim is also within that context, and there are a lot of restorative practices. I'm only describing one. The victim also has a voice in the consequences. So restorative practices does not mean no consequence. It just means a more thorough process to understand what happened, who was affected, and how we remedy it. So they have voice in that. There's other aspects of this bill. So for example, if a student batters a teacher and for whatever reason there's a determination that the student shouldn't be removed, perhaps there wasn't bodily injury, the law allows a teacher to appeal that. This is both for temporary removals and these larger sorts of offenses. So I do actually think within the bill, there is a victim focus.
If I may add, Madam Chair, if I may add, Senator, if we look on Section 5, Sub 2, Sub A, on the mock-up, okay, so it'd be page 13, since you have that document, it'd be easy to follow. It talks about some of the tenets of restorative practices, and when they're clearly relief for any victim of the pupil, meaning the pupil that did the infraction, as well as restoration and remedies related to it. So that's a big part. It doesn't seem to rise to the forefront as much, because really the focus is on how do we change the behavior of the student that did the infraction. But it's absolutely important that the victim is not left behind in this.
Dr. Ashley Greenwald for the record. I also wanted to share that restorative practices takes a great prevention approach. So when we talk about these practices, we talk about universal practices for all students. So we're teaching these skills like reflective listening, empathy, conflict resolution, emotional regulation. That's really the heart of restorative practices. As you go up in the needs of the students, as we get into those disciplinary infractions, like Dr. LaMarco was saying, there is some real intentionality around restoration for the victim and the abuser, but also it's important to know that this prevention framework and the focus on teaching appropriate behavior reduces disciplinary issues, reduces violence. We know that from the evidence. So that's a big part of this, as well as the reduction of exclusionary discipline, the reduction of discipline in schools, and the need for discipline in schools.
Thank you. Norris Dupree. Senator Titus. I want to add to that, because that is a specific emphasis that is a concern for me. Sometimes we feel that once a child and the student interact and engage in restorative justice, that for this incident that things don't have the ability to linger. There's a residue effect that can take place. And to me, what you're asking too is, how do we make sure that this relationship is mended just beyond the point of saying this happened and we apologize, and how can we go on? Because sometimes we see those residue effects or those power struggles that can take place when a student attack a teacher. I've seen teachers with panic attacks, high anxiety at that school level, and as a therapist, I'm able to go and help them, able to interact with that teacher, but also with that student, and can become a mediator with that student also, between that student and teacher over long term, to make sure that that relationship is mended. And that's very important, that we give those victims that right, the ability to heal, even within our school system.
Thank you. Senator Flores.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I think I'll start off by talking a little bit about distribution and selling. I'm always scared with that conversation, because having grown up in environments where somebody brought the weed and the friends participated, and it's distribution, right? But I mean, I'm always concerned that if just misguiding that label, where it's just a guy who brought something and it was being cool and all the friends encouraged it, and just putting them in that realm. So I would want to talk a little bit about that. I'm always careful about that. Obviously, it's different if somebody's selling something at school. I really do treat those completely different. And I think, as written, I think it's selling and distribution. Is that right? So I think the "and" forces it that it be part of selling. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about if just distribution alone would suffice. But I think the and forces it to be both. And I just wanted to clarify that it in fact has to be the selling and the distribution. It can't just be a kid who shows up to school, brought some marijuana or whatever, and it causes issues. I always treat that differently, and I'm not suggesting that that's not something severe, that we got to talk about it, we got to intervene, that there's a lot of work we need to do, absolutely. But I always want to treat those differently. So if we could talk a little bit about that. But more importantly, and I think what I care about more, and Senator Neal engaged in the conversation a little bit about a student who has an IEP. There's a behavioral issue, and then we review those together, right, to see if one is a trigger of the other, and that there's a group of folk that are involved in that. I'm also interested in engaging in the conversation, and you may think that in the mock-up, and maybe you could just walk me through in page 13, that we think we address it there, section 5, page 13 of that mock-up, and part of maybe the restoration or remedy, changing the behavior of the pupil, maybe that's all encompassing, or restoration or remedies related to the behavior of the pupil. I think often kids act up, and I put myself in that category when I was young, and friends of mine, and we act up for a whole host of reasons, right? Some of us had unstable housing, we had a bunch of issues with that. If you reached out to me when we were between apartment and house and car and apartment again, I probably would have had some behavioral issues at that moment, right? And a kid can't necessarily articulate all the stuff that they're going through, which is sometimes where I'm concerned, because you have to flush it out of them. And which is why I was such an original fan when Tyrone Thompson was engaging in this conversation, because it's part of building that relationship, but not everybody can do that, and it's difficult, I know. That's a really difficult thing to do. But what I am interested in wanting to activate in this conversation, sometimes it's the behavioral issue that activates the trigger of finally somebody paying attention to that child, right? And because it is a cry for XYZ sometimes. So I would appreciate if you could walk me through if there's something in here that you think captures a meaningful investment. A kid is acting up, a mistake was done, something horrible was done, or just acting up, and there's a whole host of things that have been progressively getting worse. And I think the attention goes to the child, but it goes, and I'm always scared, it goes to the penalty, how are we going to punish, versus how are we going to activate the trigger that we now have to pay attention to this kid. There is something happening here. And sometimes it's things that have been undiagnosed. Sometimes there are horrible triggers at home. And none of that stuff can ever meaningfully be captured, right? And I'm always just trying to engage in the conversation as somebody who grew up in an environment with certain issues going, with my own demons, and with my friends going through their own stuff, and seeing it now with the kids that I work with. We work with really closely with at-risk youth, with a lot of kids in gangs, et cetera, et cetera. But there's always an underlying trigger. And some of it is, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, but there's clearly something there that has not been formally diagnosed. And the interaction between that student is often very much on the punishment side with the adults, and not on the underlying side of it. And I'm just always trying to find that balance. So we could talk a little bit about that.
Okay, if I'm going to respond, I'm going to ask Dr. Greenwald to respond as well. One thing I would say is, first of all, thank you, because I agree. I think you're absolutely right. Oftentimes, it's a cry for help. There are some underlying issues. They're dealing with some trauma, some other things in their life. Some of the things you mentioned, or maybe many other things, right? Who knows? And that's why there's not a one individual person. There is a team, and included in that team are the mental health professionals, right? We talked about counselors, school psychologists, social workers, because that needs to be a part of the conversation so that those things can be identified and can be fleshed out, because the important thing in restorative practices is getting the student the help that they need. And that's a different kind of help if it's coming from something else. And that's why we need to have the professionals, right? There's a base level, right? Is the educators having gone through the training, certainly, but there's that team of people that make the decisions in terms of what is the plan that's necessary for a student in order for them to either fulfill the suspension or get back to reinstatement and so on. The mental health professionals have to be involved in that because there are, like you said, you're not a doctor. I'm a doctor, but I'm not that kind of doctor. Right? Okay, you are. Okay, good. But he is, and she is, and he is, right? So it needs to be that group of people involved in that conversation with that student and their parent, by the way, right? And the student and the parent and the teachers involved in what is the best thing that we can do for that child, and it is absolutely going to be different based upon some of the things that you said. Dr. Greenwald?
It's Dr. Greenwald for the record. Senator Flores, thank you for that question. I think it's a really important one. And you'll see the language multi-tiered systems of support, positive behavior interventions and supports in the bill. So I'm going to talk about it from that perspective for a minute. When we are looking at supporting students, we have sort of a tiered hierarchy of supports. And so that's why we call it multi-tiered system of support, right? So at the universal level, these are good practices, good educational practices on behavior, on mental health, on trauma-informed supports for all students, the whole student body. Part of MTSS is universal screening. And so when we have universal screening, what we're training educators to do is to recognize concerning factors or things that they might want to identify or tell someone else about the students that they have in their classroom, right? Those educators know those students, they see them every day. So we're engaging in sort of these universal practices of identifying students that might need additional supports. That data that goes to a team at the school. So I was talking earlier about the importance of teaming at the school. Those school teams are comprised of administrators, of school psychologists, school counselors, representation from general education, special education. That team reviews those data. They engage in data-based decision-making. So they're reviewing the data. They're reviewing those universal screeners that the teachers are doing on the students. They're reviewing any attendance data, academic data, behavior incident data, and they're triangulating that data. So we're teaching them, we're actually working with the school teams to teach them how to use those sets of data, not wait until the end of the school year, but use it regularly, weekly, monthly, use that data to identify which students need additional supports. Once those students are identified, like you said, maybe they're facing homelessness, maybe they've got trauma in the home, maybe there's a new crisis that came up, maybe there's a medical concern that came up, right? Those data are triangulated. That team determines then, okay, this student needs additional supports. Now we get into the advanced tiers. That's where we get more of our interventions in place, more of those mental health interventions, more trauma interventions. If we need additional restorative practices at higher levels, at the higher tiers, we engage the students in those practices. So we're matching the need of the student to interventions and progress monitoring those interventions to make sure that the student is successful in that particular intervention. Very much from the same perspective of academics, this is the sort of behavior side that we're talking about, right?
Madam Chair. Can I? Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just, no, I asked him if I could just kind of jump right in there and then he can go back. Okay. But while you were talking, it made me think about, so there are scenarios and I'm wondering, number one, I don't know what the is there a fiscal note on this bill? Because I think there's going to be additional investment.
There is not as of now, but there needs to be additional investment. I've had conversations, yes.
Yeah.
There's a mandatory training component, which Dr. Greenwald, which is why I asked her to be here, that has to accompany this.
Right, because the thing that I was thinking about was when you have a at-risk school, I'm going to take it like a high school, the principal usually will designate a vice principal or someone else to maybe be the behavior person versus themselves. But they don't have a lot of time to go in and redial, recalculate, and then assess the plan. And maybe there might be a need for another team to be created on campus that does that work. Because I just remember like when Cheyenne High School, they had a principal for a really long time, and then they brought in a new principal because the other one left and went out of state. It took him months to wrap himself around the campus and the students and really grapple with what was going on. And there were a lot of, I would say, behavior flare-ups because he was new, trying to understand, trying to get the culture, trying to get the environment. And when you know that there are issues going on the campus, you don't necessarily have the time at 4 o'clock to sit and recalculate what happened today. Like, you heard about what happened today, but really all you're doing is an Excel, right? Okay, let me see what Tuesday looks like, and then get to Friday. And so it might need to have, mandate investment from the districts into this particular bill so that we can make sure that there's another team that's responsible for that, so that burden is not placed on individuals or groups that cannot do that work. And also, I think we used to have, not an IEP, but there used to be like a student plan that could follow a student that was not an IEP student. And they kind of fell off somewhere in like
504?
It's not a 504. It was literally like an academic plan for a student that was not. And I don't think we spend a lot of time going back and checking those data points or whether or not they're even still being followed for a child, right? Because not all students are in a 504 plan or an IEP plan, but I think there's also a need to figure out how to, in the data reporting, there should be some school site recalc and re-looking at your student population that is constantly flaring up and looking at their plans to determine, do we need to address this plan, rewrite this plan, and examine this plan? Not just at the beginning of the year, but literally maybe every couple of months. Because when we talk about putting in the social workers, the counselors, or whoever's going to be there, that's going to help to guide the whole narrative of the environment and the culture and the students. So.
Senator Neal, for the record, Paul LaMarca, thank you for the question. I think what you're hitting on is what I see, especially in the last several years, is a failure around implementation. Schools right now are mandated to have a progressive discipline committee. You are right that oftentimes when we're working directly around behavior, we're working with a dean or we're working with an AEP, an AP. However, each school has a progressive discipline committee instead of the principal.
Assistant principal, yes.
Mandated also is a safety team, and the safety team at the school site includes the administrator, it includes counselor, it includes school psychologists if they are full-time at that building, it includes social worker. We do have those teams. And then to Dr. Greenwald's point, every one of our schools has on paper an MTSS team, and those teams meet periodically. And by periodically, we would prefer for them to be meeting weekly. They should be meeting at least bi-weekly. And this is where they can add new students who require support. They can monitor the supports that are being implemented for certain students. So I guess my point is, from a district lens, I would hesitate to add a new committee, but I do think absolutely we as school districts and schools have to use the committees that are already part of our team to support around behavior. And that's a piece of implementation.
This is Dr. Greenwald for the record. I also wanted to add, behavior support and discipline can't rely on one person at the site, right? We do have to have those teams, and I want to share again, we have over 200 sites in the state of Nevada implementing multi-tiered systems of support, and they have leveraged teams within their schools. So like Dr. LaMarca was sharing, Washoe County has many schools with MTSS teams. They're already in existence, but we do need to access resources and time to build up those systems to support that time for those teams to be able to engage in the review of student discipline, in the review of concerns around attendance, in the review of those concerns that maybe flag on universal screeners, right? If those teams don't have adequate time, we can't implement with fidelity. So I appreciate what you said.
Senator, I can address the question around distribution.
Distribution, yeah.
And so if I may, Madam Chair, thank you, Senator Angie Taylor, for the record. Senator, if, I think you have the mock-up, if you look at Section 3, Sub 4, and that talks about charter schools, but it's the same for university schools for profoundly gifted and public schools. It talks about that, the school may provide a plan of action based upon restorative justice to the parent or legal guardian or to the pupils. It gives some flexibility for this kid brought a couple of gummies to school versus this kid is over here selling. It gives the range. It doesn't prescribe. That's what that range is there for, to allow that to be dealt with accordingly.
Madam Chair, if I may. Thank you, Madam Chair. I was about to say my name for the record. I was presenting a bill today. It's been a long week, and I appreciate that, because I am, and I've always been very concerned about that. And you know, even when I speak with my teachers and we have really long conversations, sometimes sometimes there's frustration, because I am not trying to downplay the fact that a student should not have any substance in school. I know that. But I do see it very differently from selling. And even when you talk with some of these kids, particularly some of the kids that I mentor, I ask them why they did something. Like, well, you know, everybody thought it'd be funny, and I took my dad's XYZ, and I took it in, right? And then they don't assess how much that can do XYZ. And there's a group of kids, and they're all doing it. They're all trying to be cool. And there's a lot of harm there, but there's also a lot of immaturity there. There's a lot of things that are more focused on that side of it than the dangerous component. And you know, and I understand that our teachers have to be safe too. They need to be able to go to school and feel comfortable, and the other kids need to be safe and comfortable. And we have a responsibility to try to do all three, and that's a very difficult balancing act. So the fact that I'm focusing so heavily on the kids, I don't want to make it seem like I don't care about the teacher safety and their mental health and all the important things that they desperately need and deserve. But just, I also hate to be engaged in a conversation like this and not be talking about students, because I feel that sometimes we do that in this committee as well. The only other thing, and I appreciate the amount of work you've been doing, and I think everybody's in the same place. We're trying to do the best we can. But yeah, I'm assuming you've been working with the department, you know, and I don't think we have anybody in the room from the department, but if we're going to engage in this conversation, you know, it'd be important for us to engage them as well on this conversation, how they see all this working out, how this implementation will work. And so if you could provide some insight, and I don't know, maybe they can make their way into the room, or I'm not sure where they're at, but that would probably be helpful, so that we can really flesh out, here's the bill, here's how we see this working out, and the implementation side of it.
Angie Taylor, for the record. Thank you, Senator. And yeah, they are among the stakeholders. As I said, I've had many conversations and meetings and so on, and that's okay. It's a big bill, and it does a lot. But it's because of engaging with the department that she's sitting here. Because it was in that conversation and what we're looking for and how we want to support the students and the teachers in the school, and what would that look like from their lens and so on. That's how she got here, because that conversation is continuing to happen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe the department will join us later, and we can ask some questions directly there. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
We've sent them a text and to see if we can connect with them, or if they're in the building, to be able to come on up. But I will say that they, I met with them this morning, and they told me they spent a lot of time working with you on the bill, and they felt really good about it. So let's go to Senator Buck.
Thank you so much, Chair Lang. I've been working in this space for about 30 years, and the goal of education should be student achievement, of course. And then, of course, we're trying to teach children how to behave in society so that they can be successful, right? Hold down a job, take care of their families, behave at the grocery store, or wherever they are. And so with that, I've always worked backwards. I've worked with positive behavior supports. We used to have a SABIT team, which was the SIT team, but a student academic and behavioral intervention team that would meet if there was a behavior issue in the school. We would propose a behavior plan, which would consist of incentives and welcome to Pavlov and consequences. There was progressive discipline plans. Love and logic, I feel, has been around forever, which I feel that we inevitably coined into restorative justice, but love and logic in that the punishment fits the crime, you build empathy through love and logic. Incentives, consequences. I feel that the biggest mistake under the guise of restorative justice was that this legislator made was taking autonomy from school leaders and educators. It's led to pipeline issues. And it's easy for my colleagues on the dais and in this legislature who work in adult environments that are not subjected to abuse. And it's easy too, I guess, if you've never been a parent that teaches children from 1, 2, 3 years old, 4 years old, don't go near the pool, swimming pool. You teach them from a young age consequences. And so that's why I always struggled with the notion of restorative justice. Where I have issues, I guess, with some aspects of the bill is why 11 years old? Why not teach them when they're young? I always say it's better for students to learn when they're 5, 6, 7, as opposed to all of a sudden a light switch happens on their 11th birthday, and then all of a sudden there's severe consequences. It's better to build that in from a very young age, as soon as they're coming to school. So that's number one. And secondly, in practice. So I received a call from a principal and several principals over the last few years about the last bill. And a foster child going around bullying, sexually abusing girls, and the girls were forced to leave the school because the child was a foster child. And so I have issue with that. And I know that it's about children, but yeah, it's about the children that are doing the right things. And oftentimes what we end up doing is we make all these rules for the kids that, yes, absolutely, they need behavior plans and behavior supports. But ultimately, we punish the ones that are doing the right thing. And so I would like for you to address that as far as the bill. And then also with the data, the reduction in discipline issues, I feel are non-reports because why report it? Have you done a survey or anything to survey administrators, teachers, educators to see why they haven't been reported necessarily? Because I think that is skewed data in that there's been less discipline. I just think that the hands are tied of educators, and ultimately, what are they going to do? They're going to report or not. And for the fact that violent behavior is up only would lead me to believe that trend data and discipline issues would be up. I know that's a lot, but there's 3 questions in there.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for sharing all your thoughts on that. I think it's important that we have this conversation around restorative justice. And you, Taylor, for the record. I'm going to begin with restorative justice does not mean no discipline. And I think it has gotten that name because it has not been implemented appropriately. It does not mean more discipline. If you look in this bill, you will see there's plenty of discipline in here, including for someone who's below the age of 11. It doesn't mean that they don't have discipline. It means that child can't be expelled, but it doesn't say that your child can't be suspended. It doesn't mean that that child doesn't have the supports that are around it. It doesn't mean that that child is not held accountable. Every part of restorative justice, every issue with the restorative justice says that there is accountability for your actions. So I really do. I think it's important. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's important to get on the record that that is not what restorative justice means. What has happened, unfortunately, is because when it was first introduced, there just wasn't the time to implement it with fidelity, and so oftentimes it wasn't implemented at all, so it kind of got that name. But when we do restorative justice right, when we do restorative practices right, there is absolutely discipline. In here, you'll see expelled, you'll see suspended, and even a couple of times you see permanently expelled. But you know what you also see is support for the student, a plan for then how do we help that student, and how do we make sure that the student knows no matter what it is that you do, there's a plan that you can get back. You have to do the plan, but you can be restored. That's part of it. How do we keep that student so that they're still being educated, right? They're still learning those things as you share. That's really important for students to learn. How do we keep them in that educational environment and not send them home for 4 days to play video games? But how do we keep them so that they're still in an environment where they're receiving discipline, they're learning about their behavior, how to restore what it is that they did, how to take responsibility for their behavior, right? But at the same time, still being educated. So again, I want to make sure that it's really clear that under the age of 11, there is still discipline in this bill. And it's important because sometimes there are young kids that need help, that have traumatic instances going on. I had a grandfather that reached out to me that talked about his grandchild is in kindergarten. So that's pretty young, right? In kindergarten, had a child in kindergarten with his grandchild who was already on her third foster family, and really showed out every day, and there was a real big disruption until they finally got her connected with the MTSS team and so on. That child needed help. So yeah, you may be under 11 and you still, but that child needed to be taken out of that environment, right? And in a different environment where she could get the help that she needed, so that hopefully, you know, she will get restored and they can work on those issues, whether it's in the social work environment, mental health environment, and so on. So restorative justice does not mean no discipline. It does not mean that at all. Cutting it off at the age of 11 for expulsion does not mean no discipline. It does not mean that at all. And it doesn't mean that for foster or homeless children either. What's in here, and that's one of the things that we're going to consider as we look at things that might be important to add in this very short period of time from Assembly Bill 330. But what it says is that for foster and for homeless children, making sure that you consider if their behavior is because of their home environment, because then that's going to put them on a different plan. It doesn't mean there isn't discipline. It just means that you approach it differently because they're going to have different needs. And you want to talk a little bit about the trends in the data?
I would love to. Dr. Greenwald, for the record. Senator Buck, I think you raised some really important issues, and I'd like to respond to a couple of them, if that's okay. One of the things that you said was that the biggest mistake is taking the autonomy from school leaders to select the practices that will work in their schools. That's part of the beauty of multi-tiered systems of support, is that as a systems framework, we don't prescribe any practices. The schools select the practices that work at the local level. It gives that local control back to the schools, because what works in a high school in Clark County is very different from what is going to work at a K-12 school in Pershing County, right? Those decisions really need to be made at the local level. The other thing that you said is that, teaching consequences, I think Assemblywoman Taylor responded to that well. There is a plan for progressive discipline as part of this bill. The other thing I wanted to mention is that exclusionary discipline practices don't teach the student anything, right? It does remove the problem from the school. It gives everyone a break and a breather, but it doesn't actually teach the student anything, and unfortunately, it's not an evidence-based practice for reducing misbehavior. So that teaching component has to be part of exclusionary discipline. And that's what we're here talking about today, is the teaching of appropriate skills so that the student can come back and assimilate back into that environment. If we just continue to remove students from the environment, it damages the relationship that the student has with the educators, with the administrators, with the school. They don't want to be in an environment that doesn't want them. And none of us would want that, right? And so we really need to focus on how do we restore that relationship? How do we engage in those appropriate practices? How do we build those skills for the students? And finally, With regard to the concerns around the data that you're sharing, I can't necessarily respond to that. I don't know what's happening as far as like what data are being reported into the system. We're aggregating the data that are being collected, right? However, I do want to say that we have been implementing this work in Nevada for over 10 years at this point, so well beyond the inception of this initial bill. And we are seeing in our state from the past 10 years, we see reductions in discipline, we see improvements in student behavior, we see gains in student climate, we see increases in school attendance, decreases in dropout, increased high school graduation rates as a result of this work. And that's with studies from external evaluators that are evaluating schools that are implementing this work as compared to schools that are not implementing this work. So we have some really good demonstrated local results to share. The other thing is that nationally, there's a lot of evidence that supports this work. There's hundreds of publications of randomized control trials that show that when you implement prevention frameworks, teaching strategies to students around behavior support, that we see significant reductions in office discipline referrals and exclusionary practices at schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Buck. Are you good? Okay, so Superintendent, we asked you to come back because Senator Flores had a couple questions. And if you could sit at the table, maybe we could do a redo.
Thank you, Superintendent. I appreciate you coming back. I know you're running around doing 1,000 things, so I appreciate you coming by. And I mean, we'll start off where the conversation just led off right now. And I appreciate the remarks of my colleagues sometimes suggesting that legislators are just blankly doing things. But we do that to people all the time in this building. You're not a lawyer, so you shouldn't speak about that. You're not this, so you shouldn't speak about that. And I think that's inappropriate. I think everybody brings unique experiences, and we have a responsibility to engage in meaningful dialogue and engage experts and work collaboratively. I think that's appropriate too. Otherwise, nobody with no expertise should ever run for office, because then they got no right to speak. So just wanted to call that out, that was uncalled for. But I did want to ask, and obviously you're a subject matter expert, and you've worked extensively with this, and seeing it not through what we're hoping, and I think I got too into the details, particularly when I was talking about a student that has XYZ distribution. And I was talking about this through a very narrow lens because that's the lens I know it through the mentoring programs that we've done. But I want to back off and really see this through more of an administrative lens and an implementation lens, how we see this playing out, and the feedback that you've gone over the years. And I've understand some of it. With restorative justice, the biggest feedback that I've gotten from all my teachers is always, you presently have to build a relationship in order for some of this to work. And unfortunately, either a teacher has not been able to do that because there's no glue, no connection, and it's not for the lack of effort. And sometimes it's just we're overwhelmed with a million things and we can't do it. But and I get all that, and you may have gotten some of that feedback, but if we step back even 1,000 feet more, and if you could see more specifically and provide that lens, I think that'd be helpful for us.
Thank you, Senator Flores. Thank you for having me here, Chair Lang. For the record, my name is Joan Ebert, and I am honored to serve as the State Superintendent of Public Instruction in our great state of Nevada. And so working with Assemblywoman Taylor, and then also working on AB 330, and I will say also working on behalf of educators since I returned home in April of 2019. This has been a major topic which gets politicized at times. And, I've had my own staff who, say you're woke and then you're not, seriously, in the room. And then others that you are not making sure that everyone is in a safe learning environment. So we have those pieces across our entire state, and we're addressing a system. right, in all of this work. And I appreciate your comments. Everyone in this building comes with their perspective of every piece of work and body of work. So for the Department of Education, we worked very closely with Assemblywoman Taylor on this bill, moving both bills forward at the same time, talking specifically, and that's where we brought in Dr. Greenwald to help. She has worked with the Department of Education for many years. We fund a lot of the work that comes out of UNR. It is evidence-based, and it does show results. What we haven't been able to do as a state is to get to that tipping point where everyone has an understanding of what restorative justice is, what is appropriate in our classrooms, what we expect of our students, what we expect of adults. Our Safe Voice tips over the last 2 years, and we provided you the data, you have it, have increased immensely. And we look at that and go back to how do we be proactive? How do we start with I heard Senator Bach earlier talk about our youngest learners, making sure coming out of a pandemic that no one ever expected, right? We started with a structure in 2019 that we wanted to move forward with, had this global pandemic that transpired, and now we're all learning how to be humans together in a classroom, sitting through and working with each other, with our educators, with board members, with our community partners as we move forward. It is a system that we're looking at. And so looking at it in totality, this bill moves in the right direction. We support the work. I will tell you the documents that have been provided today, I have not had the opportunity to review. So prior to the documents that were, prior to today, we were fine with all of that work moving forward, and we stand ready to support it.
And thank you for that. And Madam Chair, the only thing I'll follow up, and this is not a question for now, but more of we understand of not binding the hands, and we want to keep flexibility, and I think that's important for a whole host of reasons that we've already addressed, no need to repeat. But as we're working forward, I still very much agree with that concept, and if you see that we are moving in that direction and that we could provide some flexibility, please let us know. I think our committee is more than willing to help on that end. And again, thank you.
Any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, we'll have you step back, and thank you, Superintendent. Appreciate that. We'll go open for public comment on Assembly Bill 285. Those speaking in favor, please come to the front. In Las Vegas, I see one person. Okay. Please, I just want to remind everyone, because we expect a lot of testimony, we're going to stick to the 2-minute rule and make sure you state and spell your name. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Chris Daly, D-A-L-Y, Nevada State Education Association, the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years, in support of AB 285. First, let me thank Assemblymember Taylor for her deep and thoughtful work on this issue. AB 285 strikes an important balance between ensuring educator safety with progressive student discipline while also maintaining the overall framework of restorative justice. It includes language to authorize the suspension, expulsion, or permanent expulsion of a student who commits an assault or battery against an employee of a school, but also provides a student removed from a classroom for more than 2 days with an option to receive education and support services in an in-person setting. This language reflects NSEA's initial position on AB 168 back in 2019, especially in cases when a student is a threat to a teacher. NSEA also appreciates the proposed amendment to 285 to require the collection of data during each disciplinary action related to school vacancies, class size, and ratios of counselors, psychologists, and social workers. High-profile school violence events are not new, not limited to El Dorado High School in 2022 or the 2013 shooting at Sparks Middle School. NSC has consistently heard alarming concerns about personal safety from our members across the state in recent years. That's why we have a long history of engagement on the issue of educator safety and student disciplinary practices. We spearheaded the creation of the progressive student discipline system decades ago, and during the 2019 session, we were the only stakeholder group here raising public concerns about the implementation of restorative justice in AB 168. We do believe that a strong restorative discipline system could reduce incidents where educators sustain injuries. However, at the same time, the system, as we heard in this robust discussion today, it needs to be proactive, requires significantly more training, attention, and of course, resources, and that discussion needs to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hello, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kalen Evans, and I'm the president of the Washoe Education Association, and we represent the certified professionals in the Washoe County School District. I wanted to say thank you to Assemblywoman Taylor and members of my school district for their work on this piece of legislation. AB 285 is about providing the types of resources and supports that all students in our schools need in order to learn, meet their individual needs. The best analogy I could think of was looking at our healthcare system. We have a number of different settings that we treat children when they are sick or injured. Everything from your basic pediatrician's office to an emergency room or ICU. Why is it that we don't take a child who is severely injured in the state of dire health to a pediatrician? It's because that facility does not have the tools, the resources, the staffing, or the training to provide that child with the services that they need. We are trying to treat students from no fault of their own, who need an ICU room in a general education classroom. A classroom that doesn't have the tools, resources, staffing, or training to provide that child with the services that they need to be successful. And while we're trying, we are doing a disservice also, not only to that child, but the other 97% of the students in the class. These other students in the classroom deserve their education as well. Districts must have the latitude and flexibility to place students in temporary settings that best support their emotional, social, and academic needs. Districts need the latitude to administer other measures beyond restorative practices that may be necessary in order for various factors. The current legislation in place does not do that and does not provide the latitude that these districts need. We strongly support AB 285 and encourage yours as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Marie Nisus, N-E-I-S-E-S-S. I'm the president of CCEA. In the face of the growing issue of violence in our schools, we need to cultivate a culture of deterrence that prevents the kind of violent and disruptive behavior we are dealing with on a daily basis, while also safeguarding the environment of learning in our classrooms so that educators can teach and students can learn. At this point, AB 285 represents a compromise in both policy and politics. From a policy perspective, we need to have the right balance between having adequate safety measures that protect staff and students against violent acts and, at the same time, ensuring progressive discipline and meaningful restorative practices are in place. From a politics perspective, this legislation in its current form took the efforts of legislators from both parties. However, this bill needs to address some of the provisions that are in AB 330. CCEA can support this legislation if there will be additions to this bill that come from AB 330, which includes additional safeguards for educators. One of the most pressing issues for teachers regarding school safety legislation is legally affirming our right and ability to immediately intervene and remove a violent or disruptive student from the classroom. Our understanding is that the bill does that, and we thank the sponsor for making sure this provision was included. To conclude, disruptive and violent behavior impacts student outcomes. Chronic disruption and violent behaviors eat up precious instructional time and erode our educators' confidence and sense of safety in their workplace. As an educator representing over 18,000 educators in CCSD, I want to make it clear that our mission is to teach students, and even with the challenges we face today with violence, this bill and our dedication as educators will ensure that every student has an opportunity to get an education. We must pass this legislation now. Thank you, and I urge your support for this bill.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Laura Ellis, L-A-U-R-A-E-L-L-I-S, and I teach 8th grade science at Dilworth Middle School in Sparks, and I represent the Washoe Education Association. I'm finishing my 7th year of teaching, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Dilworth is a wonderful community with a majority of students being hardworking, thoughtful, and kind, but there are a steady handful of kids who ruin the entire educational day for everyone. This handful of students on our campus make daily statements of being defiant, with a range of behaviors from merely being consistently out of dress code in order to sport their gang affiliation colors, or constantly using distractingly foul language, or to going to the extreme of getting in my face and calling me a racist bitch. And this last student example was angry with me because I had overheard their conversation with another student about bringing a weapon to school and attacking another kid. When I told our administration, he went on to call me a liar and many other colorful names. At this point, I had been verbally attacked and had overheard plans of possible school violence, and the kid was sent home. However, shockingly, the student was back on campus the next week. When I asked why he was allowed back, the simple answer was that the school's hands are tied, and they are simply not allowed to suspend him any more days, and there was literally nothing else that we could do. This extreme abusive behavior from students is disruptive to the learning environment of those students who are there to learn. Explosive behavior events are difficult to recover from as the teacher and control the classroom when we are trying to de-escalate the aggressive child, prevent other students from joining them now that the behavior has become normalized due to lack of consequences, and also while trying to protect the students who are genuinely scared and upset that their peers acted that way. It is humiliating, scary, and defeating as the teacher, knowing that we are essentially forced to accept defiant and abusive student behavior. Students who exhibit recurring disruptive behaviors show other students that they are not being held accountable for their actions and propagate the message that disrespect and aggressive behavior is being tolerated. All of our students deserve their education. A handful of students that are not successful in our mainstream public schools deserve an education that suits them with the supports they need, but they cannot be allowed to poison the learning environments for the ones who genuinely want to learn. I am not trained in the supports that these kids need, and I certainly can't teach the majority of my students when I am unsuccessfully trying to de-escalate the behaviors to protect my classroom environment. Please, help our schools and our districts to have the power to do what is best for everyone's education.
Thank you. Next person, please.
Legislators, thank you very much for this opportunity to address you all and comment on AB 285 as well. My name is John Hancock. I appreciate genuinely your efforts on behalf of public education. I'm a counselor at Trainer Middle School and have been a Washoe County School District educator and union member for over 25 years. Legislatures and school boards throw terms like school choice, accountability, achievement, graduation rates, restorative justice, and progressive discipline around all the time, but the fact is, those terms mean nothing when used devoid of context and truthfulness. Teachers have no control over those aspects of education in individual classrooms when overcrowding and consequence-free behavior on the part of defiant and disruptive students ruins the learning environment for students who value their education and want to be there. Most students would learn and achieve and graduate if defiant, disruptive, and sometimes violent students were held accountable in a meaningful way, up to and including genuine alternative placement for repeat offenders. In my 25 years in teaching, nothing makes me sadder than the look of despair on many students' faces as they watch teachers spend their time monitoring disruptive students instead of teaching. Learning environments would blossom if the right to a public education was balanced with the responsibility to behave. Fear of lawsuits should not drive discipline policy. There was a time when free public education and behavioral expectations were valued. That really doesn't seem to be the case at this moment in time. Things like progressive discipline and restorative justice only have value when we emphasize the words discipline and justice for everybody. I've worked most of my teaching career at-risk schools, and I know one thing beyond a shadow of a doubt. Minority and marginalized students are hurt the most when budgets and policy ignore class size and consequences for disruptive students. That's where you come in. Tax money given to sports team owners, private schools, testing contractors, and software companies and vouchers does nothing to help public schools or teachers do their jobs. Public schools have a legal obligation and moral obligation to educate every student who walks through their doors. Do not pay lip service to genuinely good ideas like restorative justice and progressive discipline, or graduation rates for that matter, without giving public school sites and districts the resources and authority to remove disruptive students from classrooms. That's not fair to teachers, students, or taxpayers.
Thank you. Next person, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Committee on Education. It's nice to see you. My name is Adam Mayberry. I'm a trustee for the Washoe County School District, District F, and I am here on behalf of the president of our school board and our entire school board in support of Assembly Bill 285. Had the opportunity to work closely with Assemblywoman Taylor when she was on the board of trustees, and she's never shied away from finding solutions and supporting our schools and our students, and I'm grateful for her. She's a wonderful human. I appreciate Dr. LaMarca being here as well. I also appreciate the thoughtful discussion that many of you have had. And more importantly, as a trustee, I'm also a father of twin teen girls who attend our schools, hence the hairline. But the school district's legislative platform specifically identifies that we will seek opportunities to support our personnel. We have platform language I want to share with you. Establish and enhance policies that ensure student and classroom safety, protect staff, and prioritize personnel's mental and physical well-being, and ensure policies that provide staff appropriate tools to maintain safe and respectful learning environments. When I tour our schools, the number one thing I hear from our teachers, as the teacher from Dilworth stated and the counselor from Trainer stated, is behavior. It's a challenge. And so it's important that we as trustees can do our jobs. The job one is to provide an environment where students can thrive and achieve. We're not walking away from these kinds of practices or progressive discipline. And we will never invest more in these practices if we don't really move forward and embrace these kinds of changes. These investments will not matter if we cannot maintain safe and respectful learning environments for our staff and our students. That is job number one for us, and this bill creates clarity that we can do both. I appreciate the privilege of your time and the great work you're doing for our great state. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Stacy Roybal, and I am a nationally board-certified teacher at Demani Ranch High School and a member of the Washoe Education Association, and I'm here in support of this bill. I have the honor to be the PE department lead at my school and the opportunity to work with some of the most amazing and caring individuals, especially the physical educators in my department. Not only are they outstanding teachers, but they are also outstanding coaches. We have veteran teachers like myself, new teachers, and a first-year teacher, all of whom share knowledge and experience in helping each other in the classroom, including how best to handle student behavior. In our PE world, we sometimes have nearly twice the number of students in our classes, which can mean twice the number of behavior problems. There are far more students without any kind of behavior issues than there are those with. These students feel the impact completely when the teacher must take away from their learning experience to deal with student behavior that has nothing to do with them. It just isn't fair to those students. It's also not fair to those students who need extra support that we can't provide in the general education classroom. Every school site has different population with different struggles and successes, different needs and issues. Even with the implementation of positive behavioral interventions and supports, there are students who do not or cannot comprehend this system. We all want our students to succeed, and that means that some students need more and need different to make that success happen. Support is needed mentally, emotionally, and environmentally with the proper resources for these students to find their way. Every child by name and face to graduation can be a reality, even if that way to graduation is walked differently by every child. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Rodriguez, and that's spelled Rodriguez, and I'm a law enforcement officer full-time, and my other full-time job is I'm a trustee for the Washoe County School District, and I am also a parent of 3 kids from K through 12. And I also want to extend gratitude to my former board president, Angie Taylor, for spearheading this and bringing it to me where I am today. So I do want to share some of the concerns that I have been hearing, kind of like Senator Flores. I too was raised in poverty, going from home to home and different school to different school. And my goal is to not criminalize our students or demonize them, but to give them help. I know fights at the flagpole and smoking in the boys' room has been going on since public education has been established. So I know that's something that's going on. So again, punishment isn't always the answer. However, corrective measures need to be taken when it's appropriate. And as a trustee, one of the few concerns, just like Trustee Mayberry was saying, we hear this over and over again from the community, staff, and we just had a town hall yesterday in our district, and we're hearing that the current practice of restorative justice is not working. And just like as Assemblywoman Taylor is saying, this hasn't been implemented correctly. And schools are supposed to be safe for not just our students, but for our staff and visitors as well. An example of how WCSD is spearheading this in many ways that we can, that the law is currently allowing us to do, is we're looking at bridging telehealth and bridging what students do need help into the community as well. So that's an example of something that we're doing. Other examples is that we have over 112 schools, and the vast majority of them have single point entries with only 8 remaining. We have school police officers, and we have dozens of social workers. And it just goes to show that we have these resources, and again, the current law is not allowing us to do and implement this fully. It's weird being on the other side of this, so it's kind of funny. So, I can share stories, numerous success stories where students are succeeding. I mean, I was just at an ROTC event where we got students going to West Point, military academies, things like that. However, on the flip side of that, and one of the reasons why I'm a trustee is that I've seen some of the failures. And I know that WCSD, we are a district on a rise, and just please allow us to show you to continue that we're doing everything that we can, and your Board of Trustees is serving our constituents to the best of our abilities, and more importantly, our students. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Kyle Fibblestad, F-I-B-E-L-S-T-A-D. I'm a teacher at Eodas Vaughn Middle School. Specifically, I am a STEM teacher. I have been there for 3 years. Initially, when I first got there, I was an English teacher, and then I went into the robotics and video production. Project design is the particular one that our school uses. I am a member of the Washoe Education Association. I really do want to thank you for your time and allowing me to come up here and speak to you about this situation. I wish to share that I, alongside many others, are worried about the current K-12 academic and climate. I would love to see positive Tier 1 behavior systems and respective consequences be implemented into our system. Currently, the system in place simply does not support our students enough. General education students and students who are under safeguarded classifications such as CIT, 504s, or other categories are not receiving the support they need. Personally, I have seen that some of these students who are under these safeguards have been regularly disrupting the academic environment for themselves and other students in general education environment. This, in my professional opinion, stems from the lack of appropriate resources, environment, and general support. Currently, students require 5 3-day suspensions to begin a documentation process. Students under these safeguards are unable to reach this documentation process as there are limits to their suspension times. Sadly, these suspensions are currently the only way that I know of to get any students into the documentation process and potentially into a different environment that may better support them. Not only is this process disruptive to students' education due to the fact that they are missing a minimum of 15 days throughout the year before the documentation process even occurs, but these also bars those with the safeguard classifications from getting the supports that they may need, as they will never reach the minimum requirements to begin the documentation and support process. Recently, I learned that with these limitations, schools are forced to begin documenting events with local authorities, which ends up streamlining students into correctional facilities. Mind you, these original plans were originally developed to avoid this. I believe that every student has the capacity for greatness. I see it every day with my students and the amazing work they do both in school and in their communities. With the appropriate supports in play, they can achieve greatness. Without the appropriate supports, however, we get the current climate where fights occur on a near daily basis. Students are afraid to come to school, teachers and staff are scared to come to work, and none of the students are learning any of the content or skills that they should. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Adrienne Conley, A-D-R-I-E-N-N-E, Conley, C-O-N-L-E-Y, and I'm a kindergarten teacher at Silver Lake Elementary School in Reno, Nevada. Thank you for letting me speak. I've been a teacher for 20 years. I have a master's degree in elementary education. I'm a nationally board certified teacher and a member of the Washoe Education Association. Nevada's kindergartners are learning what you learned in first and second grade. They must take a standardized test on a computer in winter and spring, and if they don't make the 40th percentile of students in their grade level, their parents get a letter from the state saying their child is deficient. I tell you this so you will understand that kindergarten lays a foundation for all future learning. During the 1920 school year, the kinder teacher next to me had a student who, when required to do any work, would lash out, throwing chairs and desks, hitting students, hitting the teacher, urinating on the carpet multiple times, continually trying to hurt his classmates. Her class would have to evacuate evacuate their classroom multiple times a week and sometimes several times a day, and they would evacuate into my classroom. I would go from teaching 20 students to teaching 40 students. This repeated behavior not only caused extreme stress for her students, but also my own, because we never knew when an extra 20 students would be pouring into our classroom. Her students became so accustomed to evacuating into my room, I would come back from taking my kids to music, to library, and I'd find 20 students in my classroom by themselves because she had to get them out of harm's way, and she was still in the room with a student. By the time COVID shut schools down, her classroom did not have any scissors or the basic necessities. They didn't have chairs, they didn't have desks, and they had to go to her for pencils. Anything that was considered sharp, anything that was considered dangerous was taken out of the classroom. Both our classes were severely impacted because of one 5-year-old child who, when sent to the principal for discipline, was given an iPad because only restorative practices were being used. If you don't hit anyone in 5 minutes, you get a sticker. If you don't throw any chairs in 10 minutes, you can play on the iPad. Policies that were designed to encourage changing of behaviors, and it didn't. Instances like this and others are the reason teachers, schools, sites, and districts need the ability to provide alternative settings for learning to best meet the needs of all students and provide solid accountability for student behavior. We need both positive behavior systems and consequences for student behavior. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to speak and to share my experiences.
Thanks so much.
Good afternoon, Chairman Lang and members of the committee. My name is Mary Nakashima Nielsen, and I am here today representing the Perkins Company and our client, the Washoe School Principals and Administrators Association. We're here in support of Assemblywoman Taylor's measure and also want to highlight her work of bringing together legislators and stakeholders to keep this measure moving forward. Our school site administrators are the main entity who will work with the students, the family, and affected staff members through the entire behavior cycle after an event takes place inside or outside of the classroom. With the training and freedom to properly respond to negative behaviors, administrators can properly support our staff while approaching individual student needs with a holistic lens. Sometimes temporary removal is necessary in order to get a plan in place for both the victim and the alleged offender. Suspension should be directed to promote a safe school environment for all students and allow time for some very important things to happen. Number one, the school to properly investigate an incident. 2, allow time for all parties to discuss with families and staff the plan moving forward. 3, allow time for the school to properly create a restorative reentry plan for all involved. And 4, plan and hold meetings that put students first and discuss safety expectations moving forward. We believe this measure allows for administrators to utilize best practices from start to finish while putting plans into place that would build relationships and provide students the skills to break any potential cycles. Again, we're in support of 285, and we're hopeful that with 20 days left, the sponsor will continue to consider pieces left behind in other measures and echo Dr. Lamarca's remarks of consideration of the McKinley-Vento provision. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, seeing no one else here in Carson City, and I see no one in Las Vegas. BPS, is there anyone on the telephone lines?
Certified support AB 285. Press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers wishing to testify in support at this time.
Thank you. Is there anyone in Carson City wishing to speak in opposition? There's no one on. Oh, you are. I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just as a disclosure, I am not here as Assemblywoman Clara Thomas. I am here as mother, grandma of students who attend CCSD. My name is Clara, C-L-A-R-A, Thomas, T-H-O-M-A-S. I am in opposition of Assembly Bill 285, and I speak for people that have no voice right now, and that's my family. I have things that, when I hear teachers that have been teaching for 25 years, 30 years, that have PhDs, master's degrees in education, and me, I don't have that. I am a respected mom, concerned grandma that have their kids in school in the state of Nevada. I look at what I heard earlier about how this is restorative justice is something that, excuse me, something that our kids are not entitled to. That because their misbehavior, that eliminates them from an education. As young as 6 years old, as young as 5, we just heard, that are disruptive. There has to be something going on with that child. And I think that it's necessary for us, with all the education that's in our community, with all the resources in our school, that the only thing that we can come up with is expulsion. We should be ashamed. And I will just read my statement, because this needs to be said, and I need to say it out loud. I respect every last teacher in our community. They have a rough job. They have a tough job. They are teaching at a rate of that they shouldn't be. When you have 20 to 30 to 40 kids in a classroom, that's tough. And I think that it should be known that I do or am concerned about teacher safety. I am concerned about the children's safety. And I say this because I look at some of the reports that I've seen lately on the newscast, when I see that a teacher is yelling at a student, backing the student up in a corner. The student has no other recourse but to go in that corner frightened of that adult, because that adult is screaming at the top of her lungs at this student, because the student disagreed with something that she said. Then I have another teacher that writes on the whiteboard the N-word and gets upset with his students because they said that's wrong. The student called the teacher out. So are we not concerned about student safety? I am. I'm concerned about everyone's safety. I want our school districts to be the district that I think that it could be. I don't think that we should throw away our children, because that's what we're doing. When we expel a 6-year-old, when we are reactionary from a state that has nothing to do with the state of Nevada, where a child brought a weapon to school. Now, I will go back real quick and tell you my life experience.
Assemblywoman, I'm going to let you continue because we had a lot of support and you're the only opposition. But I know people in the room are wondering why we're over 2 minutes, and that's a decision that I made.
I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I really, truly do. Some of the things that I heard earlier about life experience. No, I'm not a teacher, but I have lived experience. I lived it just recently, where my 9th grader 14 years old, excited about going into high school. She gets into high school, and no fault of her own, her family is being displaced. They now live with me. This child that was so excited about being in high school, learning all the things about this high school life that we shared our experience with her. She was willing to do that. In the move that she had to make with other people coming to her home to help her move out of her home, there was a box cutter in her backpack. And one of the children, and I called them a children, one of the students had been going into her backpack. And because, you know, when we're students and we're frightened of other students, we might not say that we are, but I know my granddaughter, I know that she was, and she never ever asked this student, "Why are you going into my backpack?" She went to her teacher, not once, but twice. Teacher told her, "Handle it yourself." So what she did, handling it herself, she told the student that she was going to report her for going into her backpack. The student went to the assistant principal, who is now called assistant principal but dean, and told the dean that she had a box cutter in her backpack. Now, when the dean called us up to the school, they said the teacher lied to us. The teacher discovered the box cutter in the backpack, which was a lie. It was a student. I said all of this to say, my granddaughter spent from September till January 3rd out of school. We went through all of the appeals to get her back into school because they said she had a weapon. When we looked up the NRS and when we called LCB, box cutter was not labeled as a weapon. The school police did not label it as a weapon, but the administrator called it a weapon, therefore it was a weapon. When we expel kids out of school without an appeal process, this is something that I think that I'm looking at other parents that said the same thing to me that I'm saying to you right now. It's not right. So are we looking at black and brown kids? Are we looking at our white counterparts? Because I'm thinking that if my granddaughter, which happens to be black and white, but if she was of a different hue, she would probably have not been out of school for that length of time. With that said, this was something that was mentally draining on a 14-year-old, that now she has to go through therapy because the adult in the room did not consider that she had no idea that that box cutter was in her backpack. She had no idea. And no kid should have to go through this. And I will just say this, as I said before during our floor discussion. What I think I need teachers to understand that it's not all about them. It's about our kids. And I understand that they go through disruption. I understand it. And something that I think that they forgot when they were, decided that they wanted to go in this profession. And this is by Tom Herner from 1998. If a child doesn't know how to read, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to swim, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to multiply, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to drive, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to behave, we teach, or do we punish? We teach. And I thank you for giving me that extra time, ma'am.
Assemblywoman, if you're okay, we have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the amendment that Assemblywoman Taylor presented, which has the multi-tiered support, the early warning system, the positive behavioral piece in Section 2.5, are you saying that that provision is not good enough? Because the way we understood it is that Section 2.5 in her amendment is allowing all of these things to happen through the plan before an expulsion.
Thank you for that question, Senator. I haven't.
Please state your name.
Clara Thomas. I have not seen the amendment that you're referring to. What I am concerned about, number one, is the expulsion of a 6-year-old. What I'm concerned about is the plan. When we say the plan, we list everything about the expulsion, we list everything about restorative justice, but we don't give the plan. What is the plan?
Senator Neal, I would like to have Assemblywoman Taylor respond as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and although you aren't here as my colleague, thank you to my colleague for
I'm
sharing your
always your
story.
colleague.
I know, but you said you weren't,
I am
Okay.
always your colleague.
All right, you said you weren't here as Assemblywoman. Nonetheless, I would like to share this. And we've had some conversations about this, but I want to clarify there is no expulsion of anyone under the age of 11. There's not, and Senator Buck, well, she's gone now, and I had not, we talked about that a little bit. There is no expulsion of that. That child personally, anybody needs help, but that child needs help. So there's certainly an opportunity for some behavior interventions. And then in terms of the plan, there is an outline of the plan for every student. It's not a detail of the plan because every student is different, every situation is different, but the components of what the plan must entail is in the bill. So there's that. You can't prescribe this is going to happen to that kid or that because it's always going to be different. But the components are there. It's in the bill because it's important to have that.
Thank you for that explanation. The only thing is that when we had Assembly Bill 168 back in 2019, we said that restorative justice was not good enough because we did not have implementation and we did not have a plan on how to implement it. And that's what I'm concerned about right now. In 285, do we have a plan? I mean, if you're telling me that each situation is different, well, each situation for restorative justice is different. So we should not be ready, and I've heard, people that have supported, including the school unions, supporting AB 285. They like expulsion. Expulsion is not the answer. We should be ashamed of that.
No, their expulsion is.
So might I suggest that the two of you get together and have further conversation to make sure that your concerns are addressed and she understands what's in your bill?
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to neutral testimony. Is there anyone wishing to speak in neutral?
Chair, members of the committee, Jonathan Norman with the Nevada Coalition of Legal Service Providers. We represent kids in foster care, and also before I took this position, I was the education advocacy attorney, so I represented not just kids in foster care, but kids from the community and families who struggled getting the right IEP supports. I'm a neutral. I really want to thank the Assemblywoman. She's been great to work with, and I think, we were in opposition on the Assembly side, and with the amendments, we're in neutral. And I would just, in my mind, our kids need so much support right now, whether that's mental health support in our community. We need to not have the vacancy rates in our schools. We need, we have 30% vacancy rates. We need to have more counselors and school social workers on our campuses, and I think that goes a lot to those discipline problems. I see the time for 20 crew walking around, and I think things like that can get our schools back to the level that we need. So we're in neutral, and we really want to thank Assemblywoman Taylor. She's been great to work with.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Holly Wellborn, and I'm the Executive Director of the Children's Advocacy Alliance, testifying in neutral of AB 285. I also want to thank Assemblywoman Taylor for her hard work on this bill, for the, it was not easy. We had a lot of conversations moving into this, but she's been open and working with all the stakeholders, and is the reason that we're moving to neutral today. We said from the outset that a safe school environment where teachers feel supported and children can learn and thrive is fundamental for child development. However, this cannot come at the risk of diminishing access to education for our most vulnerable youth. I want to address what came up, the question of why 11, and here is why. So there are currently no alternative behavioral school placements for children in that age group. The students who will be most impacted by exclusionary discipline policies are students in poverty, students of color, students with disabilities, and students with exposure to adverse childhood experiences. Thus, unless a child in that age group and their family can afford private instruction or they have the time to homeschool their child, that child will be relegated to an unstable learning environment. That was the basis of our opposition in the other house. We have come a very long way on this bill, and we thank Assemblywoman Taylor for that. The amendment presented today provides enough oversight and gives us time to monitor and provide guidance for the implementation of restorative justice practices. We'll continue to monitor the bill for further amendments and ask that we remain a part of that crucial conversation while the bill is here in this House. We thank you all for your time today. And if any of you have any questions of me, please do reach out. Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mary Brzezinski here, representing Nevada Association of School Superintendents, and Washoe County School District is part of that organization, and we fully understand where they stand on this particular bill. There have been several amendments to the bill. The initial bill was supported by NAS. There have been amendments to the bill. We understand there are more coming, and so when we get a chance to look at those and discuss that a little bit more, we'll be able to take a position on the bill. And thank you, and I do understand the timelines on it. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Good afternoon, Patricia Haddad, Director of Government Relations for the Clark County School District. Also, maybe relevant for this particular hearing today, I have a master's degree in special education for children with emotional behavioral disorders. So in neutral for the Clark County School District, my team is looking at the amendments right now and is providing feedback. We do appreciate Assemblywoman Taylor for all the work that she's done in developing this and discussions with us to continue to move this forward. Overall, though, we do see this conceptually as a positive move forward for the district. And the only other thing I just wanted to mention, there were some questions around data and where data might be available in relation to student behavior. That can be accessed on the Nevada report card. It can also be accessed on data.ccsd.net, and that is updated more frequently than the Nevada report card as well. So it's all publicly available online. Thank you.
Thanks so much. BPS, anyone on the phones wishing to speak in neutral?
Testify neutral to AB 285. Press star 9 to take your place. Yeah, there are no callers wishing to testify neutral at this time.
Okay, and BPS, I think I inadvertently missed opposition on the telephone. So if there's anyone on the phones that wants to speak in opposition.
Testify in opposition to AB 285, press star 9 to take your place in the queue. And no callers wishing to testify in opposition at this time.
Great, thank you. Assemblywoman.
Angie Taylor for the record. Thank you, Senator, Madam Chair, and to all of you for your time. We appreciate it. This is a really critical, important issue for all of us, and so the conversation has been good. It's been an ongoing conversation for a couple of months for me now. We know that students, it's important because students need support, right? Because we can't lose them, they're worth saving. It's important because teachers and staff need support. We can't lose them, they're worth saving too. And so AB 285 strives to find that line in the middle. Got some good ideas today. I'm get back to Senator Neal on that $10,000 a day, because then I can pay for some of this training we need. And and then some of the other conversations will continue so we can get something done today and tomorrow and get something back into you so we can be prepared to move forward. I
Great,
appreciate
thank you
it.
so much, and thanks to your co-presenters. And with that, I'll close the hearing on Assembly Bill 285. And I will open for public comment. Is there anyone in Carson City wishing to have public comment? Please go ahead when you're ready.
Madam Chair, Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association. The last time I was outside, it certainly looked like it was 80 degrees and sunny. With that said, I'm pretty sure it is a rainy day in Nevada, especially for our schools. With thousands of educator vacancies, the largest class sizes in the country, there's a real crisis. In Nevada, there's also a real opportunity with proposals or recommendations to put upwards to $3 billion in reserves. Educators from across northern Nevada will be convening here in Carson City in the next hour or so to say that for our schools, it's a rainy day in Nevada, and we hope that the legislature invests more and is able to fund things like the resources that we need for implementation of restorative practices in the bill you just heard, and for programs like Time for 20, so we can address educator compensation and class size. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone on the phones wishing to give public comment?
If you would like to provide public comment, press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers wishing to. Oh, 1 second.
We do have one caller, Chair. Just one moment.
Great, thank you.
Caller, press star 6 to unmute yourself, please.
Good morning or good afternoon. I'm so sorry for keeping everybody waiting. I was looking for the number and I got it. So I'm in. My name is Dora Martinez, representing the Nevada Disability Peer Action Coalition. And I concur and ditto the person that went before me about rainy day in California. In Nevada, I'm so sorry, it's late. Teachers do need an increase, especially kids who are receiving IEP 504. I have a friend who is my group. She's disabled, her daughter is disabled, and she's not getting the optimum accommodations through the school because of their lack of training. So please hear our voices and let's work together and make our future bright again, especially with children who are disabled. Thank you and have a magnificent day. Enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you so much. Okay, with that, I just want to let you know that tomorrow, or Friday is the last day for passage out of committees, and we are going to have a call of the chair. I anticipate that the meeting will be in the morning. So Commerce and Labor meets at 8 o'clock. They think they'll be finished at 9:30. My call of the chair will probably be 9:30 in this room. So make sure you pay attention to that so that if you want to be here for the work session, that you will have that opportunity. And with that, we'll adjourn Senate Education. Thank you.